Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
Deep in the bleak countryside where fog clung to every surface and ancient trees whispered secrets to those who dared to pass by, there stood a decrepit farmhouse that local legend insisted was cursed. The rumors had circulated for decades, each generation daring one another to approach its rusted gate. Tonight, when a chill wind howled as if lamenting forgotten sorrows, three strangers found themselves drawn to that ill-fated dwelling by fate and the desperate need to face their own inner demons. Rebecca, a determined writer with a penchant for the macabre, had always sought authenticity. After receiving an unsigned letter hinting at forbidden truths in the farmhouse, she packed her notepad and ventured into the dark unknown. Alongside her was Tom, a former police detective whose once steady hands trembled with suppressed trauma. Tom's career had ended abruptly after a violent incident left him questioning the limits of human endurance. Finally, there was Mark, a cynical paranormal investigator burdened by loss. His sister's untimely death had driven him to explore every eerie occurrence in a desperate quest for rational answers that might mend his broken heart. The farmhouse, hidden at the edge of a dense forest, loomed under a heavy sky. Its walls were cloaked in layers of peeling paint, and shattered windows stared like empty sockets. The trio stepped hesitantly onto the creaking porch, feeling every board beneath their feet echo with a painful reminder of lives once lived. Rebecca's voice broke the oppressive silence. I can feel something, a presence. It's almost as if the house itself is alive, whispering to us. Tom nodded, his eyes dark with memories of unspeakable horrors, while Mark clenched his fists as if to hold himself together. Inside the mansion, the air was thick with decay and despair. Shadows danced in corners as if reluctant to reveal their hidden forms. The group split up to scour the long-abandoned rooms, each seeking clues that might validate the eerie reputation of the place. In the basement, Tom discovered a series of old police records and photographs. One image, yellowed with time, depicted a group of law enforcement officers standing defiantly before the farmhouse. The handwritten note on the back read, "They think they can silence us, but we are already dead." Tom's voice trembled as he recounted the story to Rebecca and Mark in a hushed whisper near a flickering lantern light. They were investigating disappearances here, missing people, including children, and it seems that something in this house forced them to go mad. His words hung in the stale air as the trio felt a quiet dread seep into their bones. Meanwhile, in an upstairs room, Rebecca discovered a dusty diary bound in cracked leather. The entries, written in a spidery hand, chronicled the descent of a young woman named Eliza into unspeakable torment. The writings revealed that Eliza had been tormented by a faceless creature haunting the corridors and lurking beneath the floorboards. "It whispers to me in the dark," the diary read. "I hear its voice, a hiss, a plea for blood, and I know my time on this earth grows short." As Rebecca read aloud, a sudden guttural voice responded from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come." The sound reverberated off the walls, vibrating through every fiber of her being. The trio froze, each heart pounding in the stagnant gloom. In that moment, a brutal knock on the basement door shattered their mounting terror. Mark, ever the pragmatic investigator, forced his courage into a strained smile and declared, "I'll see who it is." Upon opening the door, however, he was met with nothing but darkness, as if the night itself had swallowed the intruder. Still, on the threshold lay a blood-stained scrap of cloth that seemed all too familiar to his own past, a relic connected to his sister's disappearance. His voice barely held steady as he murmured, "This can't be a coincidence." No sooner had Mark spoken than the farmhouse itself came alive. Floorboards creaked as if heavy footsteps traversed unseen corridors, and a mournful wail echoed from within the walls. Their flashlights flickered erratically, casting nightmares upon the surface of peeling wallpaper that depicted disturbing images. Contorted faces frozen in silent agony and handwritten warnings that screamed of retribution. Desperate to escape the encroaching madness, the trio attempted to exit, only to find that the front door would not budge, as though bolted by forces beyond the physical realm. Tom's voice cut through the panic. We need to stay together. Splitting up only plays into whatever wants to keep us here. His voice was authoritative, yet edged with desperation. Still, the relentless presence of something darker compelled each of them to seek answers. Clinging to the hope that the secrets recorded in Eliza's diary might hold the key to their escape, Rebecca insisted, "I think the diary might be our only clue to understanding what's haunting this place. We need to read it all and piece together its story." As they pored over the diary, a series of frightening events unspooled before their eyes, recorded in frantic scribbles by Eliza's trembling hand. She recounted meetings with shadowy figures, spectral apparitions who, with hollow eyes and mangled smiles, walked the corridors at night. The writings hinted that the force inside the farmhouse was once human, a tortured soul consumed by regret, and had been bound to the structure in a ritual intended to imprison its guilt, only to have the magic backfire. In a particularly chilling entry, Eliza wrote, "The creature is me, and yet it is not me. A reflection of the sins of those who dared to use forbidden rituals. And now I must atone by taking the light from every living soul who dares to awaken me." The realization sent shivers through them. The diary wasn't merely a record of supernatural torment. It was a confession, a message from a spirit desperate for both redemption and revenge. Mark's face grew grim as he connected fragments of his own nightmare. "My sister, there's something about this ritual," he whispered, recalling his own investigation into occult gatherings that had led his family down a dark path. The sinister presence had always pursued his lineage in whispers and half-remembered nightmares, each echoing a promise of inevitable retribution. Their determination to confront the entity escalated when a shrill scream split the silence, emanating from the very center of the house. The three scrambled towards the source, their footsteps rapid and echoing along the forsaken hallways. In a cramped, disorganized parlor, they found an apparition, a spectral figure dressed in faded, elegant clothing, her eyes wide with terror and sorrow. The ghost's voice was ragged as she pleaded, "Help me, I am trapped by my own sins. I beg you, free me before I free my curse upon you." Rebecca edged closer, heart pounding wildly, and softly retorted, "Who are you? What binds you to this place?" The spirit's form flickered violently, and between moments of clarity, she offered a clue. "The ritual, the mirror in the hall. Break it, and my spirit may finally rest. But beware, the mirror does not show truth, it reveals what lies beneath in every heart." Tom, his detective mind piecing together layers of evidence and supernatural lore, added, "You're saying that the mirror holds the key? We must find it." His tone was firm, driven by years of unraveling mysteries, even if they often defied explanation. Reluctantly, the ghost nodded, fading into the dim corridor as if whisked away by invisible forces. Guided by the spectral whispers, they ascended to a long-forgotten wing of the farmhouse. At the center of this wing stood a once grand mirror, its surface mottled with age and streaked by what could only be interpreted as spectral hands. Gathering their courage, they surrounded the mirror. Rebecca's hand trembled as she reached out, her fingers trailing across the cold, glassy surface. At that exact moment, the mirror illuminated ghastly images, a myriad of nightmares. The faces of the lost children, the weeping ghost of Eliza, and even their own reflections warped with horror. A guttural laugh echoed from within the mirror as if the darkness behind it had found its voice. Mark's eyes widened in terror as the mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water. "We need to break it," he cried, his voice a mix of desperation and determination. Tom steadied a heavy iron rod, holding it aloft with resolve. "On my mark," he commanded, his voice shaking slightly but unwavering. In unison, with trembling hands and pounding hearts, they brought the rod down upon the cursed mirror. The mirror shattered into 1,000 glistening shards, and for a moment, it felt as though time itself had stuttered to a stop. The air vibrated with unchained energy, and the shattered pieces seemed to scream as they skittered across the floor. Then, as if exhaling a long-held breath, the oppressive weight began to lift. For a brief, shining moment, the spectral images faded into calm clarity. A soft light filled the corridor where shadows had reigned supreme. The ghostly presence of Eliza, now unburdened, smiled sadly. "Thank you," she whispered in a tone laden with both sorrow and relief, her words lingering like a benediction in the still air. But the victory was as brief as it was unexpected. The destruction of the mirror had also unleashed the remaining dark forces that had been contained for centuries. A deep, resonating murmur began to swell through the halls, a chorus of voices from the abyss calling out in despair and malice. The farmhouse shuddered as unseen hands clawed at the fabric of reality, drawing the trio into a vortex of past horrors and present nightmares. Tom motioned for Rebecca and Mark to huddle close as unseen forces battered against them. "We must leave now," he commanded, his voice barely audible amid the cacophonous wailing that grew louder with each passing second. "This house, it's collapsing in on itself." The floor beneath them trembled violently, as if the building was trying to undo the binding of ancient magic all at once. As they scrambled toward what they hoped was an exit, ghostly figures materialized in every doorway. Faces twisted in agony and despair reached out with skeletal hands, pleading for release from their eternal torment. Mark, glancing back at a familiar spectral figure that resembled his sister, felt a resurgence of guilt and grief. He shouted, "I'm sorry," but the words were drowned in the chaos that threatened to pull him back into the darkness. The corridor stretched interminably, warping under the influence of the unleashed energies. Rebecca took Mark's hand, her own resolve hardening in the face of despair. "We're not going to let this darkness take us," she said firmly, her voice echoing with a mixture of defiance and desperation. With every step, they retraced their path through the maddening labyrinth of memories and shadows, marking their progress by the fading cries of the ghosts. Reaching the front door once more, they found it miraculously unlatched. Tom pushed it open with a surge of adrenaline, and the trio burst out into the cold night air. The oppressive atmosphere of the farmhouse receded behind them as they sprinted through the overgrown driveway and into the surrounding forest. Behind, the farmhouse seemed to convulse, emitting bursts of unholy light before settling into an eerie silence. In the aftermath, as they gathered their scattered thoughts by the roadside beneath a waning moon, the trio reflected on the night's unspeakable ordeal. Rebecca clutched her notepad, now filled with the macabre confessions of Eliza and the whispered secrets of the damned. Tom's haunted eyes betrayed a lingering doubt, as if the horrors he had witnessed would never truly fade. And Mark, his face etched with sorrow and regret, stared blankly at the fractured remnants of his past that had converged with the present in the cursed farmhouse. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, washing the night's terrors in the pale light of a new day, a distant, almost imperceptible murmur rose from the ruins of the farmhouse. It was a final lament, a reminder that some curses once awakened are never truly laid to rest. The darkness had been momentarily banished, but it was not vanquished. Deep within the decaying walls of that forsaken place, ancient forces stirred, waiting patiently for the next soul brave or foolish enough to seek out the truth behind the whispered legends. The journey had left them forever changed, scarred by memories that would haunt their dreams, and a shared understanding that true horror lies not in monstrous shapes or supernatural entities alone, but in the cold, unyielding reality that sometimes the darkest part of the human soul is mirrored in the abyss. Together, they had faced a piece of that abyss, but its echo would forever reverberate in every creak of the night and every forgotten story whispered by the wind.
Story number 2.
In the outskirts of a once thriving industrial town, where rust consumed abandoned factories and the wind carried secrets of a past long forgotten, there was an asylum that stood as a monument to human cruelty and despair. Locals in hushed tones spoke of the old Briarwood Asylum, a place where the boundaries between sanity and madness had blurred, and where the painful echoes of tormented souls could be heard on moonless nights. It was here that a disparate group of strangers would converge, drawn by personal tragedies and the desperate need to uncover truths hidden in the recesses of human suffering. Evelyn, a resilient investigative journalist with scars from a haunting personal loss, had spent years chasing mysterious leads. When she learned of Briarwood's recent rise in paranormal activity, she felt compelled to document its dark history. Accompanying her was Daniel, an ex-psychiatrist whose professional life had been shattered by a scandal that cost him everything he held dear. Haunted by memories of patients who had whispered curses in dim therapy rooms and who had vanished in unexplained circumstances, he now sought solace in understanding the true nature of the human mind under extreme duress. Finally, there was Marcus, a troubled writer whose nightmares had bled into his waking hours, leaving him with visions of despair and the palpable stench of fear. His sister had been one of the forgotten souls of Briarwood, a victim of an enigmatic incident that had claimed her sanity as well as her life. The trio arrived at Briarwood just as twilight surrendered to the encroaching darkness. The asylum's facade was a desolate tapestry of peeling bricks, barred windows, and rusted iron that seemed to echo the screams of those who had suffered within its walls. As they stepped through the broken main door, a shudder ran down Evelyn's spine. A sensation of being watched that she had felt in many dangerous assignments before, yet never so acutely. Inside, the corridors were cloaked in murk and neglect. The sour stench of decaying paper and mold pervaded the air. Daniel paused before a wall covered in cryptic symbols and desperate scrawls left by minds teetering on the edge of collapse. He murmured, half to himself and half to his companions, "These markings, they're like the desperate pleas of souls caught in limbo. Each one is a cry for help or a warning." His voice was low and measured, betraying a profound empathy and a deep-seated terror of the unknown. Venturing deeper into the labyrinth, they discovered a sparse common room where remnants of personal belongings were scattered as if the patients had fled in terror. Amid the detritus, Evelyn uncovered a brittle, leather-bound journal tucked beneath a broken window. The entries, written in erratic, overlapping script, depicted the day-to-day torment of the patients. One entry stood out, a chilling account by a patient named Lillian, detailing an experiment conducted by a shadowy figure known only as Dr. Blackwell. According to Lillian, the doctor had believed that tormenting the mind with fear could reveal the hidden layers of existence, but his methods bordered on the diabolical. At night, when the silence grows heavy, the voices of the damned rise, and they speak the truth, Lillian had written. Each scream is a piece of the puzzle of our own souls, lost in a void of unending darkness. As Evelyn read aloud from the journal, the building seemed to respond. A gust of frigid wind surged through the corridor, flickering the weak light of their flashlights and drawing their eyes to a distant door that had not been noticed before. Daniel approached it cautiously, his hand resting on a rusted doorknob that looked as if it hadn't been turned in decades. This might be where the experiments took place, he speculated, his voice steady despite the undercurrent of dread. Inside the room, the darkness was almost impenetrable. With careful steps, Marcus lit a small lantern, revealing a space that was disturbingly pristine compared to the rest of Briarwood. The walls bore peeling, faded murals that depicted horrifying visions of agony and submission, figures writhing under torment, their eyes empty and beseeching. In the middle of the room lay a solitary metal chair, secured with thick intertwining straps. A dusty reel-to-reel tape recorder sat atop a battered desk, its presence an anachronistic relic among the desolation. Daniel reached out, hesitating before pressing play. A crackle filled the silence before a voice emerged, distorted and layered with static. Trial of pain, to break the mind, to reveal the truth of existence. The recording intoned in a monotone that reverberated in the small room. Each syllable was measured, yet imbued with the unmistakable cadence of genuine obsession. Marcus grimaced, clutching his chest as if the sound carried a literal weight. "This is more than just a sick experiment," he whispered, his eyes wide with incredulity. "There's a ritual here, an invocation of something dark and ancient." Their exploration was abruptly disrupted by an ear-splitting shriek that echoed through the asylum. It was as if the sound of pure anguish had been distilled into one agonizing cry. Evelyn, Daniel, and Marcus exchanged harrowing glances before bolting out of the room, desperate to locate the source of the distress. The corridors twisted in impossible angles, morphing into a nightmarish maze that defied the laws of physics. Shadows coalesced into shapes of grotesque figures that flickered at the edge of their vision, teasing them with the promise of more horror. In one particularly oppressive hallway, they came upon a wall of mirrors that stretched from floor to ceiling. The reflections revealed not only their own terrified faces, but also something else, phantom silhouettes lurking behind them, appearing for a split second before vanishing. "It's like the mirrors are showing us our darkest fears," Evelyn remarked, her voice a mixture of scientific curiosity and raw terror. Daniel replied, "They're not just mirrors, they're portals to the other side, an echo of pain we can't escape." The group pressed forward, each step drawing them deeper into the heart of Briarwood's malevolence. Marcus's mind flashed back to his childhood, to whispered warnings in the night, to the sinister figure that had haunted his dreams long before his sister's disappearance. "I've felt this presence all my life," he confided, his voice trembling with both fear and determination. "It's as if the asylum isn't just a building. It's alive, feeding on our fears and memories." Suddenly, the oppressive silence was shattered by a cacophonous blend of voices, an overlapping chorus of despair that seemed to emanate from the very walls. In the midst of their confusion, a spectral figure materialized before them. Dressed in the tattered remnants of a nurse's uniform, her eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity. Her voice, both gentle and chilling, wafted through the air. "You must leave this place before you become a part of our endless torment." Her words were an appeal, almost maternal in their sorrow, yet weighted with an inevitability that chilled them to the bone. Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she demanded, "Who are you? Why are you bound to this place?" The ghost's face contorted with grief and regret. "I was once a keeper of souls here, tasked with comforting the suffering. But the darkness took hold when Dr. Seth Blackwell's experiments tore through the fabric of reality. I tried to save them, but I too became ensnared in a curse that binds us all. I am Anna, and I have watched as this place feasted on the despair of the innocent." Her hand outstretched, trembling with earnest desperation, beckoned them to follow her deeper into the asylum's bowels. Compelled by a mixture of duty and morbid curiosity, the trio followed Anna into a hidden passage that led to an underground chamber, a sanctum of forgotten horrors. The room was circular, dominated by an altar constructed of cold stone, over which hung a network of rusted chains and splintered wood. In the center of the altar lay an object that sent a shiver racing down their spines. A cracked porcelain doll, its eyes seemingly imbued with a malignant intelligence. Surrounding the chamber were walls carved with sigils and incantations, their lines stark against the dark stone as if etched by desperate hands in a final attempt to trap the unholy presence within. Daniel stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "This is a focal point, a gateway for the dark energy that has been imprisoned here." The doll, once harmless in appearance, now seemed to pulse with a sinister life of its own. Anna's voice quivered as she recounted the legend of the doll. It is said that the doll was a vessel, a conduit, through which the lost souls of Briarwood were forced to endure eternal torment. Dr. Blackwell believed that by binding their anguish, he could harness unimaginable power. But the price was the damning of those souls, and the nurse who failed them. Her eyes filled with tears, long since dried, and she begged them with a desperate urgency, "You must break the ritual, destroy the doll, and sever the connection between the damned and this world." Without hesitation, Marcus retrieved a heavy iron rod from a nearby crate, its surface pitted and scarred by time. "We need to act quickly. If we leave it intact, the energies in this room will only grow stronger," he said, his tone determined despite the trembling in his voice. In that agonizing moment, Daniel and Evelyn exchanged a final, wordless glance that acknowledged the life-altering risk they were about to take. With a singular, forceful swing, Marcus brought down the rod upon the porcelain doll. For an instant, the chamber was filled with a deafening silence. Then the doll shattered into innumerable fragments that scattered across the stone floor. A massive, thunderous groan reverberated through the room, and the chains overhead rattled as if agitated by the sudden change in energy. The walls began to convulse and the ground quaked, threatening to swallow them whole. Anna's anguished cry mingled with the roar of the collapsing chamber. "The curse is breaking. Run!" The sound of shattering stone and anguished moans swelled around them as the dark energies, once held in stasis by the cursed ritual, sought release. The trio stumbled through the labyrinthine corridors as the asylum itself seemed to come alive in a frenzy of wrath. Walls splintered, ceilings crumbled, and the disembodied voices of the damned shrieked in a dissonant symphony of despair. In the chaos, Evelyn led the charge, clutching the journal that had become her lifeline to the asylum's tormented past. "This way!" she yelled, her voice cutting through the tumult. Daniel clutched at her hand as they navigated the disintegrating corridors, trying desperately to remember the route Anna had shown them. Marcus, his eyes fixed on the monstrous distortions of reality around him, staggered but persevered, driven by a need to atone for the guilt that had haunted his nights for so long. As they neared the main entrance, the building's malevolent pulse seemed to intensify. The exit appeared in the distance, shrouded in a blinding glare of pale light that cut through the suffocating darkness. But the final stretch was not without its harrowing encounter. A spectral figure, manifesting with an aura of wrath and despair, barred their path, a tormented soul encased in a web of ethereal agony. Its voice was a tortured roar. "You cannot leave. Your souls are now intertwined with our torment. Stay and suffer as we have suffered." Daniel, steeling his resolve, stepped forward. "We are not here to become your captives. We seek only to release you from this nightmare," he declared, his tone resonating with a mixture of conviction and sorrow. In response, the spirit's features softened briefly, its gaze reflecting centuries of trapped anguish and longing for release. For a moment, the specter hesitated as the frozen clock of fate slowed its relentless ticking. It was then that Anna reappeared, a quiet, sorrowful figure glowing with an ethereal light that belied the darkness around her. "Forgive him," she whispered to the spirit, extending a trembling hand. "He is seeking redemption, as are you. Let our release be your salvation as well." The spectral figure wavered between fury and surrender, its form flickering like a candle in a storm, until finally, with a sound resembling a final mournful sigh, it dissolved into the myriad echoes of lost souls. The exit beckoned, and with one final surge of determination, Evelyn, Daniel, and Marcus plunged through the collapsing doorway and into the chilled embrace of the night. Behind them, Briarwood Asylum crumbled into ruin, a monument of shattered lives and broken dreams. The violent collapse was both a requiem and a liberation for the tortured souls once held captive within its walls. Once outside, the trio paused under a sky smeared with the early light of dawn. Their faces were streaked with sweat and grime, etched with an indelible mixture of relief, grief, and residual terror. Daniel exhaled deeply, eyes distant as if still haunted by visions of those desperate screams and pleading eyes. "We may have broken the cycle here," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of both hope and despair. "But every scar of the past leaves its mark, and some ghosts never truly fade." Evelyn clutched her journal tightly, her mind reeling with the stories of sorrow and torment that now demanded to be told. "We have a duty to remember, to honor their stories," she said softly, determined that the horror of Briarwood would not be lost to time. Meanwhile, Marcus gazed into the distance, his eyes reflecting both the pain of his own loss and the faint glimmer of forgiveness. "Maybe, by facing these demons, we can finally free ourselves from our own nightmares," he offered, half to himself and half to his comrades. In the waning moments before dawn, as the broken silhouette of Briarwood faded into the horizon, the trio realized that their encounter had left an indelible imprint on their souls. The horrors they had witnessed were not simply confined to the ruined halls of an asylum. They were a mirror of the darkest parts of humanity, the capacity for cruelty, suffering, and loss. And yet, amid that darkness, there was a whisper of redemption, a chance to honor the past by ensuring that the stories of those who had suffered would continue to echo, a beacon for those brave enough to confront the abyss. They parted ways that day with heavy hearts and resolute determination. For Evelyn, it meant turning her harrowing experience into words that could reach a world too often indifferent to the silent cries of the broken. Daniel resolved to confront his own inner torment and to rebuild a shattered trust in the human mind. Marcus, with his soul forever intertwined with the memory of his lost sister and the spectral inhabitants of Briarwood, took solace in the fragile hope that by lifting the curse of the past, he had also taken a step toward his own redemption. And so, beneath the pale light of day that dispelled the lingering shadows of night, the terrors of Briarwood Asylum became both a grim reminder and a catalyst for change, a story of horror, despair, and the faint, persistent possibility of salvation, even in the most tortured of places.
Story number 3.
In the outskirts of a forgotten town stood a mansion that time and sanity had long since abandoned, a sprawling relic of faded grandeur and inexplicable dread. Locals whispered of Black Hollow Manor, a place where misfortune reigned and every creaking floorboard seemed to murmur in voices not meant for mortal ears. Under a sky heavy with an omen of storms, 3 uneasy travelers found themselves drawn to the manor by forces as mysterious as the shadows that clung to its ruined walls. Ethan, a determined historian with an obsession for unraveling mysteries of the past, had heard the legends since childhood. Determined to document every detail, he arrived armed with notebooks, old maps, and a trembling hope that he might finally bring clarity to decades of dark rumors. Alongside him was Vanessa, a photographer whose camera had captured the stark realities of life in haunted places. Vanessa's glare was as intense as her determination. Every shutter click was an act of defiance against the overwhelming darkness. The third, Marcus, was a reserved local whose life had been scarred by inexplicable encounters at Black Hollow Road during his early youth. His silence masked a tumult of emotion and memories too painful to recount. Memories of echoing screams, fleeting apparitions, and a feeling of being watched from every corner of the night. The manor's iron gates, rusted and twisted like the gnarled hands of nature itself, creaked open as if reluctant to allow trespassers into its secrets. A damp wind carried the scent of decay and the faint, bitter tang of long-forgotten sorrow. Ethan's heart pounded as he stepped inside. "I've studied every history, every account of this place," he murmured with a conviction that belied his trembling hands. "Tonight we confront the truth." Inside, the grand foyer loomed under a chandelier that hung like a decaying crown. Dust motes danced in stray beams of moonlight filtering through shattered stained glass, creating a kaleidoscope of ghostly colors. Vanessa clicked her camera with deliberate caution, capturing the eerie interplay of light and shadow. In the background, Marcus's eyes darted to corners that seemed to swell with the threat of unseen watchers. "I remember this place," he whispered hoarsely, more to himself than to his companions. "I remember voices in the dark and a cold that seeps into your very soul." Their exploration began in earnest. As they wandered through long, dusty corridors lined with faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow every hesitant step, Ethan found an ornate, decaying journal tucked away in a hidden niche. The leather cover, cracked with age and stained with unknown substances, beckoned him to read its secrets aloud. The journal belonged to a man named Alistair Blackwood, a former resident whose descent into madness was as gradual as it was heartbreaking. In penmanship shaky yet resolute, Blackwood recounted a disturbing ritual meant to harness the energies of the manor. "In our misguided quest for power," he wrote, "we opened a door to something uncontainable, and in that moment our souls were marred by the laughter of the void." A sudden, anguished wail erupted from deep within the manor, a sound that was equal parts agony and accusation. The floors reverberated as if the very building were mourning an unbearable loss. Vanessa's camera stuttered in her frantic attempts to record the haunting sound, while Ethan's eyes shone with a mix of horror and reluctant understanding. "This is no mere ghost story," he breathed, voice hushed and pained. "This is history, a tragedy etched into the walls of this place." Their search led them to what once had been the heart of the manor, a vast drawing room lined with towering bookshelves and extravagant chandeliers now obscured by cobwebs. Amid the detritus of shattered memories, Marcus pointed to a grand mirror set against one far wall. "This mirror," he said, his voice a low rumble laden with dread, "has been spoken of for generations. They say it shows more than just reflections." With painstaking care, Vanessa moved closer, her camera capturing flashes of distorted images in the glass. The mirror's surface rippled and flickered, distorting the already fractured reality into grotesque shapes. In it, they saw not only their faces twisted by terror, but also something else, a shadowy figure lurking behind them, its form barely distinguishable from the surrounding gloom. Ethan's pulse quickened as he pieced together clues from the journal and the oppressive atmosphere of the manor. "This mirror was the focal point of Blackwood's rituals," he explained, voice trembling with both fascination and fear. "It is said to be an altar, a portal through which unspeakable energies were invited into our world. Blackwood believed that if he could capture these energies, he could control fate itself. Instead, he unleashed something that has tormented this place ever since." Before the trio could fully process his words, the mirror flashed a chilling vision. A parade of spectral figures, a procession of lost souls contorted in silent screams, marching beneath a ruined archway. Among them was a gaunt child with hollow eyes and a voice that seemed to echo from realms forgotten by time. "They're here," the child whispered, though no mouth moved to form the sound. Vanessa's camera fell silent, its power drained by the inexplicable force emanating from that terrible glimpse of the past. The silence was shattered by a forceful knock at the heavy oak door at the far end of the drawing room. Marcus, compelled by memories of being tormented as a child near those same doors, hesitated only for a moment before stepping forward. He opened the door and found nothing but an empty corridor swallowed by a deep, whispering darkness. However, at the threshold lay a small brass key glinting under the weak light, a key that seemed to pulse with a heartbeat of its own. Ethan carefully picked it up. "This must have belonged to Blackwood himself," he said softly, his voice echoing in the cold space. "It's a sign that we're on the right path, or perhaps a warning that we're meddling with things best left undisturbed." Unable to resist the lure of further secrets, the trio followed the mysterious key down a narrow spiral staircase that led to the manor's basement, a labyrinth of claustrophobic halls and forgotten chambers. The damp, moldy air was heavy with the stench of rot and despair. Along the jagged stone walls, they discovered cryptic symbols carved in an ancient hand, a language of torment and curses that resonated with the dire prose of Blackwood's journal. As they advanced, the temperature plummeted, and an oppressive sadness clawed at their minds. It was as if each step was a descent not only into the depths of the manor, but into their own darkest fears. In the center of the basement lay an imposing iron door, its surface chiseled with monstrous forms that twisted in agony. The brass key fit perfectly into its lock, releasing a creak that reverberated like a death knell. Beyond the door, the room opened into what could only be described as a crypt, a chamber lined with niches holding cracked urns and portraits of long-dead souls whose eyes bore silent testimonies of endless torment. In the center of the chamber, atop a stone pedestal, stood an altar adorned with strange relics. A collection of old ritualistic implements, a set of dusty bones arranged in a curious pattern, and a cracked mirror shard that seemed to emit a faint pulsating glow. A sudden, frenzied whisper filled the chamber. The voices, layered and indistinct, swirled around them like a maelstrom of desperation. Ethan's voice wavered as he recited one of Blackwood's desperate entries from the journal. "We tampered with the forces of the beyond, tempting fate by bidding the dark spirits answer our call, but they are capricious and unforgiving." The words hung heavily in the stagnant air, and Vanessa's fingers dug into the leather of her camera strap as the whispers crescendoed into a terrified cacophony. Marcus's eyes fluttered closed as he recalled the horrific flashes of childhood torment. "I remember," he murmured. "I remember that night, the voices in the dark, the feeling that something was coming for me." His confession was but an echo in the shadow-laden room, where the unseen presence seemed to linger with palpable hunger. Then, with a sudden burst of force, the mirror shard on the altar began to vibrate, its fractured surface coalescing into a swirling portal of spectral light. From this churning vortex emerged a figure whose presence defied description, a towering, indistinct form with eyes that blazed with an otherworldly fire. The air around it sizzled with raw malevolence, and as it spoke, its voice was less a sound and more an overwhelming force of nature. "You dare disturb the sanctum of the damned? Your souls are as fragile as the glass of this shattered mirror." The entity's voice reverberated in the chamber, drowning out the whispered prayers of unseen souls. Ethan stood his ground, though his knees buckled with the weight of terror. "I seek only to understand," he declared, his voice cracking as he clutched the journal to his chest. "We wish to end this suffering, to put an end to the curse that has tormented these walls." His words, though resolute, were met with a chilling laugh that seemed to seep from the very stones around them. Vanessa stepped forward, her camera now trembling in her grasp. "How can we free these souls?" she pleaded, her eyes locked on the monstrous figure whose very presence seemed to twist the air into nightmares. "Tell us what must be done." The creature's form flickered and shuddered as if struggling with its own identity. "Only through the reckoning of truth can the shackles be broken. Sacrifice what you hold dear and face the mirror of your own soul," it intoned, each syllable darkening the atmosphere further. For an agonizing moment, silence fell, a silence so profound that even the echo of their racing hearts seemed to be caught in a frozen suspense. Marcus, his face drawn and haunted by the memories of pain, stepped forward. "I've carried this fear all my life," he said softly, voice trembling. "Maybe if I confront what I once ran from, if I sacrifice the part of me that's been hiding, then perhaps the curse will be lifted." his eyes locked with the shifting entity as if daring it to challenge his resolve. In that charged moment, the air crackled with an energy that could only be described as the tipping point between mortal frailty and infernal might. The ancient mirror shard began to pulse with a steady rhythm, a heartbeat of darkness that synchronized with their own. Ethan's eyes scanned the inscriptions carved into the altar and the symbols etched on the walls, desperate to find a clue, an incantation that might seal the rift. The curse was born of a ritual, one that demanded the unraveling of our fears, he said, voice low and urgent. We must now face those fears, our own inner demons, if we are to return balance to this place. As if in answer, the room began to twist and distort. Ethan's journal pages fluttered like trapped birds, rearranging themselves into a desperate plea from Blackwood. Only by the surrender of what you cherish can you break the cycle. Embrace your terror. Let it become your guide. At that moment, Vanessa's camera captured an image, a flash of a memory so raw it nearly broke her spirit. In the photo, she saw herself as a child, standing before a mirror much like this, haunted by her own reflection. The realization struck her with horrifying clarity. This curse was not limited to the mansion alone. It was a mirror to the depths of human despair, a haunting truth that each soul must confront. Determined now, the three resolved to confront their own inner darkness. Marcus stepped toward the altar and, with a trembling hand, placed a locket that had belonged to his long-lost sister, a token of a past filled with regret and unanswered questions, onto the cold stone. "This is the part of me I must relinquish," he whispered. His voice wavered as he let go of the locket, watching it slide into the crevice of time and sorrow. Ethan took up the journal, reciting the incantation that Blackwood had penned in a moment of desperate clarity. "By the sorrow of the past and the hope of redemption, I offer the light within me. Let the truth be revealed, and let the curse be undone." His words, charged with a quiet intensity, resonated through the chamber with a force that shook the very foundation of the manor. Vanessa, clutching her camera like a talisman, stepped before the mirror vortex and confronted the dreadful reflection. "I offer you my fear, my grief, and my hidden truths," she declared. "See me as I am, unfiltered and raw. Only in truth can we break this binding darkness." As she spoke, her reflection in the mirror shifted dramatically, blurring into a montage of her most vulnerable memories: the loss of loved ones, the isolation of a life haunted by apparitions, and the silent screams of a soul constantly at war with itself. The mansion itself trembled in response. Walls shuddered, and the oppressive presence that had long haunted every corner began to wane, as if the act of confronting these buried truths diminished its hold on reality. The swirling energies in the vortex slowed, and the monstrous figure's visage flickered with uncertainty. A cacophony of anguished voices rose in a final, desperate chorus, a mixture of sorrow, regret, and finally a hint of liberation. Then, with a pulse of blinding light and a sound like the shattering of 1,000 mirrors, the vortex collapsed in on itself. The mirrors on the walls, the mirror shard on the altar, and even the great mirror in the drawing room all splintered simultaneously. The dark force that had loomed so ominously seemed to recoil, sucked back into the void from whence it came. In that pivotal moment, the oppressive weight of the curse began to lift. The air, heavy with centuries of despair, lightened as if the very walls were taking their first long-awaited breath. In the aftermath, the trio found themselves alone in a now quiet chamber. For a long moment, all that was left was the echo of their own heartbeats, a reminder that terror might be vanquished, but its imprint would forever linger in those who had faced it. Marcus retrieved the locket from the crevice, its tarnished surface reflecting not the dark gloom of the manor, but a soft, fading light. "It's over," he whispered, voice heavy with relief and sorrow. "We've paid the price for our own redemption." Ethan closed the battered journal with care, his eyes misty as he regarded the evidence of a past marred by hubris and terror. "We've seen what lies beneath the surface of our fears," he said, "and tonight we've learned that even in the darkest of places, there's a spark of truth that can set us free." Vanessa lowered her camera, its lens still glistening with the final image of a mirror now shattered beyond repair. A mirror that had shown them every shadow of their soul and, in doing so, granted them a measure of peace. Outside, as dawn broke over Black Hollow Road, soft hues of light began to chase away the remnants of night. The manor, once a towering symbol of unrelenting horror, now stood silent, a decaying monument to a curse that had been confronted and, at least for now, subdued. The trio lingered on the overgrown lawn, sharing a moment of quiet reflection as the sun's rays warmed their weary faces. They had ventured into the heart of terror, not only to document a grim history, but also to confront the depths of their own haunted pasts. The trio left Black Hollow Manor with the heavy weight of their experiences still pressing on their minds, but also with the quiet hope that confronting their own darkest fears had led them to a form of liberation. The horrors they faced were not just of the manor, but reflections of the internal struggles they each carried. By facing these fears head-on, they gained a new understanding of themselves, and in doing so, found a fragile peace. Although the manor would eventually crumble, the memories of that night, of the terror and the truth, would linger, forever tied to Black Hollow Road. It was a reminder that confronting one's fears and accepting them, no matter how terrifying, can ultimately lead to strength and growth. The night they spent in the manor would stay with them forever, but so too would the lesson. The greatest horrors often reside within, and only by facing them can true liberation be found.
Story number 4.
Beneath a sallow, iron-gray sky in a remote corner of New England lay a forgotten hamlet, and within its barren bounds, an enigma that had outlived both time and terror. An aged asylum, known locally as Hawthorne Sanatorium, sprawled like a malignant organism at the fringe of a dense forest. Abandoned for over half a century, its decaying walls and labyrinthine corridors whispered stories of shattered minds and unspoken horrors. It was a place that the few locals still spoke of with hushed voices and haunted glances, a repository of sinister secrets that were best left undisturbed. Yet fate, it would seem, had other plans for those who craved to unearth its sinister truth. Elena, a determined cultural anthropologist with a penchant for the macabre, had dedicated years to researching the chilling folklore of the region. Drawn by the accounts of tormented souls and eerie phenomena, she embarked on a solitary journey to uncover the reality hidden behind the legends of Hawthorne. But she was not alone in her pursuit. Joining her was Liam, an ex-EMT whose near-fatal brush with darkness in his youth had left him with scars both visible and hidden. His calm, analytical demeanor belied a tormented spirit that had witnessed inexplicable events at the edge of life. Finally, there was Daryl, a grizzled local handyman whose life had been entwined with the asylum's tragedy since childhood. His eyes, clouded by endless nights of insomnia, betrayed memories of screams and flickers of ghostly figures in the periphery of his vision. Together, these three ventured into the decaying bowels of Hawthorne Sanatorium, determined to expose the horrors that lay within. Their arrival was marked by a heavy, oppressive silence that engulfed the asylum like a living shroud. The building's facade, once a proud edifice of sterile white and grandeur, now bore the scars of neglect, windows shattered into jagged fragments, walls stained by murky puddles of unknown origin, and a wrought iron gate that squealed in protest as it was pushed open. Elena felt an instinctive chill as she set foot on the property, her heart thumping in an irregular cadence. "This place, it's as if it breathes despair," she murmured, her voice a mixture of wonder and trepidation. Inside, the corridors stretched into darkness with a labyrinthine complexity that defied reason. Faded portraits of long-forgotten patients, eyes rimmed with sorrow and madness, gazed out from peeling walls. Every step stirred echoes of long-departed footsteps, and the scent of mildew and decay was overwhelming. Liam's flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, revealing cryptic symbols etched into the plaster, a desperate attempt at marking moments of anguish or warding off unspeakable evil. "I can almost feel their pain here," he said softly, his voice wavering between scientific observation and personal dread. The group eventually reached a vast central hall where a shattered chandelier dangled precariously from a collapsed ceiling. Dust motes danced like forlorn spirits in the beam of their lights. Daryl stopped in front of a battered door that seemed oddly out of place amidst the ruin. "This room was once the records archive," his voice low and gravelly. "They say that those who entered here never truly left, not without taking a piece of the past with them." Although his tone was matter-of-fact, the haunted look in his eyes spoke of unspeakable memories he wished to forget. Inside the archive, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Stacks of decrepit files, yellowed photographs, and handwritten notes lay scattered as if abandoned in a moment of frantic evacuation. Elena's fingers trembled as she delicately opened a leather-bound ledger. The entries were written in hurried, almost frantic script, documenting experiments that bordered on the occult, attempts to harness ethereal energies through manipulation of the human psyche. One chilling passage read, "In our desperation to reconcile mind and spirit, we turned to ancient rites and condemned our souls to eternal unrest." As her eyes scanned the text, a sudden chill swept over her, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of soft, sorrowful crying echoing through the silent archive. "Did you hear that?" Liam asked, glancing nervously at Daryl. The handyman's weathered face darkened. "They say it was Martha," he replied, voice hushed, "a nurse who went mad from the torment here. Legend has it that she still roams these halls, tending to the lost and broken, desperate to ease their suffering, and perhaps her own." The corridors beyond seemed to murmur in response, as if the very building mourned the unending cycle of pain encapsulated within its walls. Driven by equal parts fear and scientific curiosity, the trio pressed deeper into the asylum, navigating twisting hallways that seemed to shift and distort like the memories of a dying mind. They discovered a winding staircase leading to the lower levels, a subterranean network of isolation cells and forgotten treatment rooms. In one chamber, beneath the murky glow of a single sputtering bulb, they encountered a mirror. But this was no ordinary reflection. The mirror's surface shimmered with an unearthly luminescence, and within it fleeting images of tormented faces passed by, a montage of horror etched in every twisted feature. Elena stared into the mirror, transfixed by the voices it seemed to carry. Desperate pleas mingled with malicious laughter, each whisper a fragment of a tortured soul. Before any of them could fully process the apparition, a guttural voice reverberated through the narrow cell. "Why do you disturb our quiet despair?" It was as if the mirror itself had become a conduit for the voices of the damned. Liam stepped forward, trying to steady his voice. "We're here to understand," he said, forcing calm into his tone despite the fear that prickled along his spine. "We mean you no harm." The mirror's surface rippled violently as if in response to his words. Then slowly, a spectral figure emerged, a gaunt, translucent woman dressed in a tattered nurse's uniform. Her eyes were pools of eternal sorrow, and her expression balanced on the precipice of agony and wrath. "Understanding comes at a cost," she intoned, her voice a sorrowful dirge. "Too many have entered these halls with their doubts, leaving behind shattered lives and restless phantoms." Elena felt a pang of empathy mingle with her terror as she whispered, "Martha, is that your name?" The specter's form trembled for a brief, heart-wrenching moment before she nodded slowly. "I was once tasked with saving those souls," she replied, her voice cracking under the weight of endless regret. "But in the darkness, I too was lost. And now I wander, forever chained to this wretched place. Your arrival has stirred the ancient anguish. Now you must witness what we endured." Her words, heavy with the sorrow of 1,000 lost lives, ignited a cascade of chilling visions in the minds of the intruders. Flashes of unspeakable experiments, anguished screams, and spectral apparitions swirled around them as if the very fabric of time was unraveling. In that moment, the air thickened with despair, a palpable burden that threatened to swallow them whole. Daryl, his voice trembling with both fear and resolve, interjected, "We need to leave now. The building, it's alive with these tormented memories, and it's trying to claim us as well." But Elena, driven by an unyielding desire for truth, stepped forward. "We're not here to flee," she declared, her tone firm despite her inner terror. "We're here to honor these lost souls and to expose the reality behind their suffering. Their stories deserve to be told." At her insistence, Liam and Daryl hesitated, but the despair in Martha's spectral gaze compelled them to acquiesce. "There's another way," Martha whispered, drifting backward through the corridor until she reached a hidden door, partially obscured by tangled ivy. "Beyond this door lies the Chamber of Echoes. Within it, the tragedies of Hawthorne are bound by a curse that echoes into eternity. Destroy the talisman that fuels this curse, and you may set us free from your own torment and ours." With no other choice but to face the supernatural onslaught head-on, the trio followed the ghostly nurse down a narrow, spiraling passageway. The corridor itself seemed to pulse with a dark heartbeat, each step punctuated by the distant, agonizing murmur of those long past. The door led them into a vast cavernous room, its walls lined with ancient runes and macabre illustrations depicting ritualistic rites of binding and damnation. At its center lay a stone pedestal, upon which sat an object that radiated a palpable aura of malevolence, a small, intricately carved obsidian talisman, the rumored heart of the curse. Liam's eyes narrowed as he examined the object. This must be what holds the anguish of the past together, he murmured, his voice laced with equal parts awe and repulsion. Elena reached out a trembling hand. Then if we destroy it, we might break the cycle of suffering. We have to try. But as her fingers neared the obsidian stone, the room shuddered violently. The runes along the walls began to glow with an eldritch light, and the temperature plummeted so dramatically that each breath emerged as a visible cloud in the frigid air. A deep, resonant voice boomed around them, as if the very souls of the departed had joined in a cacophonous dirge. "Do not desecrate that which binds us all." Darrell staggered back, his face drained of color. We don't understand," he stammered, his voice cracking like brittle glass. "It's not just a relic. It's our torment, our history made manifest." Elena's eyes burned with determination. "Then we must accept our role in this tragedy. We are the conduits of truth. And if our sacrifice, our willingness to confront our darkest memories can end this curse, then it is a sacrifice we must make." Liam, though gripped by an instinctive terror, nodded slowly in agreement. "We face our own demons by breaking the cycle here. We must destroy the talisman." Gathering their resolve, the three stepped towards the pedestal. Elena produced a small hammer from her satchel, a tool that now represented hope against an insidious power. With every strike against the obsidian, the talisman emitted a high-pitched keening that resonated with the screams of unseen souls. The room quaked as if angry at their intrusion. The spectral nurse Martha hovered near them, her eyes closed in a silent prayer as she pleaded for deliverance. Each blow chipped away at the dark stone until, with one final resounding crash, the talisman shattered into countless glistening fragments that scattered across the cold stone floor. In that shattering moment, the anguished wails subsided, replaced by a sudden, oppressive silence, a silence that was almost more terrifying than the cacophony of tormented voices had been. The blue-green glow of the runes faded, and the oppressive chill receded, leaving behind only the echo of a promise fulfilled. For a suspended moment, all three stood frozen amidst the remnants of the curse, each acutely aware of the price paid by generations of lost souls. Liam exhaled shakily, his voice barely a whisper. "Did we just free them?" Martha drifted forward, now bathed in a soft, otherworldly luminescence. "You have done what many before could not," she intoned, her tone a fragile blend of relief and sorrow. "The echoes of our suffering may now finally fade into the past, but remember, the price of truth is eternal. You must carry these memories, these lessons, so that the horrors of Hawthorne are never repeated." Elena, tears glistening in her eyes from both the physical cold and the emotional weight of the moment, nodded solemnly. "We will not forget," she promised. "Our scars will serve as reminders of the darkness that once gripped this place, and of the hope that can come from confronting it." Slowly, the echoes of the past began to dissipate, their final sighs mingling with the gentle rustle of the wind outside. The corridors of Hawthorne Sanatorium, now stripped of their malevolent energy, exhaled a weary farewell as they sank deeper into the silence of forgotten tragedies. Exiting the building, the trio found themselves bathed in the soft, pre-dawn glow that slowly illuminated the gray expanse of the hamlet. Each carried with them not only the physical evidence of that fateful night, a notebook filled with cryptic entries, a few shattered relics of the obsidian talisman, and the lingering, spectral visage of Martha, but also the indelible mark of truth uncovered in the face of horror. As the first fragile rays of light pierced the horizon, Elena, Liam, and Darrell stood together in a brief, poignant silence. They had ventured into the heart of madness and emerged with a story of sorrow and redemption. A story that would serve as a somber reminder of the darkness that once dwelled within those haunted walls and the resilience of the human spirit when it confronts its own inner demons. And although Hawthorne Sanatorium now lay still and silent, its legacy of despair transformed into a beacon of hard-won truth, the echoes of the past would forever linger in the hearts of those who dared to look deep into the abyss, to remind the world that sometimes the only way to overcome terror is to face it unflinchingly, and to honor the souls who suffered in silence.
Story number 5.
In the remote backwaters of rural New England, shrouded by a perpetual mist that seemed to seep from the earth itself, lay the ruins of Morewood Estate, a decaying mansion with a reputation as dark as the forest that encircled it. The locals rarely spoke of the estate, and when they did, their voices dropped to a conspiratorial murmur. Stories of disembodied laughter, relentless tapping on window panes, and fleeting apparitions at the edge of vision were passed down from one hushed generation to the next. Yet amidst these modern legends, one piece of history remained persistently unresolved. What horrid secret had seeped into the very stones of Morewood Estate to turn it into a magnet for sorrow and terror? Jessica Arden, a determined investigative journalist known for her unyielding appetite for the truth, had long been haunted by that question. Drawn to the estate by a series of cryptic letters hinting at long-hidden family secrets and unresolved tragedies, she set out on a stormy autumn evening to confront the darkness herself. Accompanying her was Nathan Calloway, a reserved local historian whose lineage traced back to the estate's original inhabitants. He had spent his childhood shuttling between folklore and whispered warnings, and his heart now pounded with both fear and a burning curiosity to exhume the estate's buried past. Their reluctant partner, Felix Morrow, had been the longtime groundskeeper of the dilapidated property, a man whose haunted eyes and tremulous hands betrayed secrets that defied explanation. Known in the village as the solitary guardian of a legacy of misery, Felix understood more about Morewood than he dared to reveal. The trio met at the rusted iron gate of the estate, its form twisted like the gnarled fingers of an ancient specter. A dense fog obscured the landscape, rendering the silhouette of the mansion, a brooding mass of weathered stone and shattered windows, even more foreboding. Jessica's heart pounded as she adjusted the strap on her battered leather satchel. "I've read every record I could find about this place," she said softly, her breath visible in the chill air. "Tonight, we write our own chapter of truth or terror." Nathan's response was subdued, laden with an old grief. "My family has carried the burden of Morewood's curse for generations. I fear we might awaken something that should have remained undisturbed." Felix only nodded silently, his eyes fixed on the dark entrance before them. Inside the mansion, a thick layer of dust blurred the feeble light filtering through cracked, grimy windows. The vast foyer bore marks of past grandeur. A grand staircase sagged beneath its own history, and portraits of grim-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow every hesitant step. As they ventured deeper, each step creaked in protest, echoing against the empty halls like murmurs of lost souls. The air, heavy with decay, mingled with the faint metallic scent of old blood. It was as if the estate itself exhaled sorrow. Their exploration led them into a drawing room. Furniture lay overturned as if in the midst of a frantic escape. A shattered clock on the mantel silently commemorated an event long past. On a desk beneath a broken chandelier, Jessica discovered an aged diary with brittle, yellowed pages. The diary belonged to Eleanor Morewood, a once luminous woman whose final entries were smeared with tears and desperation. Her shaky hand had recorded confessions of guilt and despair. "We summoned the voices of the dead, believing we could harness their pain for eternal youth. Instead, I have condemned my family to an unending darkness. The spirits demand a price, a tribute in blood and sorrow." As she read the words aloud, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing their flickering lantern and plunging them momentarily into darkness. Nathan's voice trembled as he whispered, "This isn't a mere relic. It's a confession, and it may be the key to understanding our curse." Before any further words could be uttered, the sound of soft, shuffling footsteps echoed through the hallway. The trio froze. A voice, faint yet unmistakable, a whisper of anguish and pleading, seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. "Help us. Remember." Felix, clutching his worn cap tightly, muttered, "I've heard that voice since I first tended to this place. They say it belongs to the lost souls of the estate, the ones sacrificed in a failed ritual that doomed Eleanor's line." His eyes darted about the gloom, and the shadows appeared to writhe in silent agony. With no time to retreat, they proceeded cautiously down a corridor lined with tattered wallpaper and charred sconces. The passage led them to a room that served as what Nathan described as the sanctum of regret. This chamber, once used for clandestine gatherings by Eleanor and her secret society, was adorned with strange sigils etched into the walls and intricate patterns that resembled twisted vines of despair. In the center of the room, atop a marble plinth, lay an ornate mirror. Unlike an ordinary looking glass, its surface was clouded by a strange mist that swirled with an unearthly light. Jessica inched closer, her eyes transfixed by the reflection. In it, she saw fleeting images. A young girl in tattered white, her face contorted in terror. A pale man with hollow eyes reaching out for mercy. And finally, her own reflection twisted with fear and the faint aura of the estate's malignant force. As her blood ran cold, the mirror whispered in a voice that seemed to merge with the sound of her racing heartbeat. "Behold your truth, and bear the burden of our sins." Nathan's hand shook as he gently placed his palm against the cold surface. "We are connected," he murmured, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Our fates are intertwined with the sorrow of those long dead." Before they could debate the meaning of his words, a deep, resonant knock resounded from behind the mirror. The sound carried an authoritative command, as if long-forgotten time itself demanded acknowledgement. Felix stepped forward reluctantly. "There's a passage behind it," he said in a gravelly whisper. With a calculated push, the mirror shuddered and swung open to reveal a narrow stairwell spiraling downward into a subterranean labyrinth. The air that drifted upward was thick with moisture and decay, a fetid breath from the underworld. Jessica hesitated only a moment before muttering, "We must go on if we are to confront what truly lies behind the curse." In the dim light of their lanterns, the trio descended the stairs, the sound of their cautious steps mingling with distant, muffled cries and the scratch of unseen claws across stone walls. The passage opened into a vast, crypt-like chamber, lined with niches that held broken urns, fragmented relics, and the remnants of ritualistic symbols. At the far end of the chamber, on a raised altar, lay a small, intricately carved wooden box sealed with ancient chains and rusted locks. Nathan knelt before it, his eyes wide with a mixture of dread and reverence. "This box," he said slowly, "is set into the curse, the object that Eleanor bound our family's destiny to. Legend has it that the ritual was incomplete, and the restless souls we now hear were trapped within its confines." Jessica, her pulse pounding louder than the silence that followed, asked, "What happens if we open it?" Her voice barely carried over the heavy silence. Felix's answer was grim and resigned. "Some say that only by opening the box will the restless spirits be freed, but others believe it will unleash them upon the world. There is no clean escape from this destiny." The weight of his words pressed down upon them. Outside, the storm raged and the wind howled like a chorus of the damned. Despite the peril, a steadfast resolve began to form among them. They agreed that the truth, however terrifying, must be unearthed. With trembling hands, Nathan worked to unfasten the chains. Each metallic clink echoed unnervingly, as if punctuating the rhythm of a funeral dirge. Finally, with one decisive motion, he pried open the box. Inside, nestled amongst aged velvet and brittle parchment, lay an object that defied simple description. A small, heart-shaped stone that pulsed faintly with a sickly, phosphorescent glow. At first, nothing happened. The chamber remained enshrouded in a deathly quiet, the very atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Then a soft sigh, like the exhalation of centuries of despair, rippled through the crypt. From the darkness emerged silhouettes, ghostly figures whose faces were marred by indescribable pain and regret. They floated effortlessly toward the trio, their eyes void and pleading. A voice, neither male nor female, whispered all around them. "You have awoken us. Our agony, our eternal torment. Release us, if you dare, from the cycle of your own sorrow, for we are the echoes of a past that refuses to perish." Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she clutched the diary close to her chest. "We are not here to harm you," she pleaded, her voice quivering. "We only want to understand. We want to give you rest." The unseen presence swirled around them as if in answer, its form shifting in the gloom, sometimes a cluster of lamenting shadows, sometimes a solitary, emaciated face reaching out in silent supplication. Nathan, his voice softer now as he regarded the pulsating stone, said, "This stone is the anchor of our suffering. It binds the living with the memories of the damned. We must destroy it, even if only to break the chain of curses that spans generations." Felix's weary expression hardened with a steely resolve. "My family has guarded these secrets far too long," he murmured, and now it is time to end this endless night. Their decision made, the trio gathered their courage. Jessica carefully wrapped the heart-shaped stone in an old cloth, its glow dancing between her fingers. With trembling determination, they ascended the narrow staircase back to the surface. As they emerged into the cold, wind-lashed night, a violent storm had taken hold of the land. Rain pelted the cracked pathway as thunder shook the very earth beneath them. The estate, once a monument to sorrow, now loomed in a surreal tableau of shadow and light, its broken windows flickering with lightning-like flashes. In the heart of the estate's overgrown courtyard, a long-forgotten stone well awaited, a relic of a time when rituals and incantations were woven into the fabric of life. Nathan explained in a hushed tone, "The well was once used to cast offerings into the unknown abyss. Perhaps it is here that we can consign our burden and sever the ties between our world and this cursed legacy." With no other viable option, the trio approached the ancient well. The rain mingled with their tears as they took their positions. Jessica, with both sorrow and resolve, lifted the cloth to reveal the stone. "This is for Eleanor, for our ancestors, and for all the souls trapped by this relentless curse," she whispered. With a heavy heart, she hurled the stone into the well. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. The stone plummeted into the inky depths, and then a silence, almost reverent in its intensity, descended. The well's mouth appeared to glow from within, drawing the gaze of the three as if swallowing their collective regret. Then, as if a great release had been granted, the spectral figures began to dissipate. One by one, their tortured visages faded into the darkness, leaving behind only the gentle echo of sorrow and the promise of long-sought rest. The storm gradually abated, its fury spent as dawn crept over the horizon. In the waning moments of that night's terror, as the sky lightened from charcoal to the soft blush of early morning, the trio sat in silence before Morewood Estate. Their faces bore the marks of horror, grief, and yet, strangely, a nascent hope. They had confronted the cursed legacy head-on, not merely to record its horrors, but to liberate both the tormented dead and their own wounded souls. Nathan softly spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "The past is a wound that may never fully heal. But tonight, we have done what we thought impossible. We've given these souls a path to peace." Jessica added, "We now carry not just their story, but a reminder. The darkness within history can only be vanquished when we are brave enough to face it head-on and let the truth set us free." Even Felix, always the stoic guardian, allowed a tear to escape as he murmured, "We've ended the cycle tonight, but our lives will forever be marked by the echoes of what we've witnessed." As the first rays of sunrise crept over the estate, bathing its ruined facade in a gentle glow, the mansion seemed to sigh, a sound that might have been relief or resignation. The heavy specter of Morewood's curse, slowly dissolved by the sacrifice of truth and courage, receded into the silent folds of history. Yet the memory of that dreadful night, the unearthly voices, and the endless sorrow of trapped souls would forever linger in their hearts, a grim reminder that some horrors, however deeply buried, must be faced to find redemption. In the days that followed, Jessica's articles brought forth questions and testimonies from the wider world. People spoke of inexplicable events near Morewood Estate. Some even claimed to see the faint outline of a woman in white along the foggy roads. But more than that, her story became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. A declaration that even in our darkest moments, the courage to confront our deepest fears can lead to light. Nathan continued his research with renewed purpose, determined to document the full legacy of Morewood, not as a tale of eternal torment, but as a chronicle of liberation from long-held curses. And Felix, once burdened by the weight of unspeakable secrets, slowly learned to let the past rest as he mended his broken spirit among the living. Though Morewood Estate now stood as little more than a ruin, a fading relic of a tormented age, the scars of its legacy were etched deep within the souls of all who dared to bear witness. And on quiet nights, when the wind gently stirred the overgrown ivy and the silence seemed almost sacred, one might still hear the faint sound of a relief sigh, a reminder that sometimes the end of a curse is the beginning of healing.
Story number 6.
In a remote valley of northern Maine, where dense forests swallowed winding roads and winter's chill clung to every stone, lay the abandoned Hargrove Orphanage. The building's crumbling facade and boarded-up windows had long inspired both superstition and sorrow among the locals. Whispers spoke of anguished cries, echoes of lost laughter, and a presence that roamed empty halls at night. For decades, its tragic legacy had been buried beneath layers of snow and silence, until one bitter autumn, when three souls, driven by pain and the relentless search for truth, found themselves drawn together at its threshold. Claire Monroe, an intrepid graduate student with a passion for uncovering hidden histories, arrived at the orphanage with a stack of old documents and a determination to piece together the dark stories of the children who once lived there. The orphanage had been closed abruptly in the 1960s after a series of disturbing incidents, and its former caretakers had long vanished into obscurity. Claire believed that behind the faded records lay secrets of abuse, neglect, and a supernatural force that turned innocent laughter into forlorn echoes. Accompanying her was Marcus Avery, a seasoned photographer known for capturing the eerie and forsaken. His rugged face and steady hands belied the personal demons he carried from a past haunted by loss. Marcus had heard rumors of ghostly figures among the ruins and felt that his lens might finally capture something beyond explanation, a glimpse into a world where suffering lingered like a permanent stain. Finally, joining them was Detective Liam O'Reilly, a retired cop who had spent years investigating cold cases that the police files wished to forget. Liam's own childhood had been marred by tragedy, and his unyielding search for justice led him to believe that some wrongs, even those long buried, demanded reckoning. The trio arrived at dusk. A towering silhouette of the orphanage emerged from the gathering mist like a specter of sorrow. Overgrown ivy crawled along cracked stone walls, and an ancient iron gate hung crookedly on its hinges, creaking ominously in the biting wind. As they stepped through the threshold, a heavy silence smothered them, a palpable pressure that seemed to whisper, "Leave, while you can still escape." Claire's heart pounded against her ribs as she steeled herself. "We're here to uncover the truth," she declared softly, the tremor in her voice betraying her determination. The voices of these lost children deserve to be heard. Liam's deep-set eyes narrowed as he scanned the derelict corridors. "There are too many unanswered questions about what happened here," he murmured. "I fear there are secrets that even the dead would prefer left undisturbed." Marcus, his camera hanging from a leather strap around his neck, only nodded silently as he adjusted his settings, his gaze fixed on the oppressive gloom beyond. They began their exploration in what had once been the main hall, a cavernous space with high, ornate ceilings now sagging under the weight of time. Dust lay thick on every surface. Splintered wood and shattered glass crunched underfoot as if the building itself was mourning every step they took. Broken toys and faded remnants of a child's drawing were strewn about, each relic whispering memories of the small lives that had once inhabited these cold walls. Their first discovery came in a cramped, moldy office off the main hall. Shelves bowed under the accumulated weight of yellowed ledgers, brittle photographs, and handwritten letters. Claire gingerly leafed through a weathered diary that belonged to a former matron named Agnes Hargrove. In frantic, looping script, Agnes described the torment that the children endured: rations cut, cruel punishments meted out by staff driven mad by grief and isolation, and inexplicable happenings in the dead of night. One particular entry chilled them all. At twilight, the hallway fills with soft weeping, and the walls remember every sigh. I fear that our cruelty has summoned something beyond mortal sin, a shadow that preys on our despair and guides us toward unending damnation. As Claire read aloud, a distant sound echoed from somewhere deeper within the building. A plaintive sob, as if a child's cry mingled with the rustling of dead leaves. Marcus's hand froze on his camera. "You heard that, didn't you?" he whispered. Liam's expression hardened. "I did," he replied, his voice low. "There's more to this place than what these pages tell us." Guided by the diary's grim account, they advanced into what was once a long corridor lined with small, barred windows. In every nook, they sensed the presence of unseen eyes watching them, as if the ghosts of the past were silently gauging their intentions. The corridor led to a large locked door at the far end. A heavy brass plaque, now tarnished by time, bore an inscription simply stating "dormitory." With no key to be found among the scattered remnants of the past, Claire pressed her ear against the cold wood. In the silence that followed, a soft, ethereal humming emerged, an almost imperceptible lullaby that sent shivers down her spine. Marcus was the first to speak after the sound faded. "It's beautiful and terrifying," he said, his voice barely a whisper as he captured a series of photos of the door. Liam's eyes glinted with a mixture of compassion and hardened resolve. "That lullaby," he said slowly, "it reminds me of something from my own childhood, a song my mother would sing in the dead of night. But there was always something eerie about it, as if sorrow itself was woven into the melody." Determined to unlock the secrets behind the dormitory door, the trio retraced their steps to the main hall in search of any indication of a key or a mechanism that might reveal its opening. In a dusty corner near a broken window, Claire discovered an embossed tin box. Inside lay a small, tarnished key etched with intricate, almost ritualistic designs. With trembling fingers, she inserted the key into the lock. The door groaned open on rusted hinges, unleashing a gust of frigid air that swept past them like a warning. Inside, the dormitory was far different from the decrepitude outside. Rows of narrow, crumbling beds faced peeling walls, and in the center of the room stood a colossal antique mirror framed in carved mahogany. In the mirror's glassy depths, the trio saw not only their trembling reflections, but fleeting images. A girl in a faded dress reaching out with tear-stained eyes, a boy crouched in a corner as if hiding from an unseen horror. The air here was thick with sorrow, and the lullaby they had heard earlier now seemed to emanate from the very walls. "Who are you?" Claire cried out, her voice trembling as much as the light from her lantern. For an agonizing moment, there was no response, only the echo of her own plea. Then, as if in answer, the mirror rippled like disturbed water, and a spectral voice whispered, "We are forgotten, abandoned to the silence. You have come to remember us." The room plunged into silence again, every heart suspended in an almost unbearable hush. Liam approached the mirror slowly, his eyes searching for any trace of the tormented souls. "We only wish to honor your memory," he said, his tone firm yet pleading. "If you can tell us your story, we will ensure that you are not forgotten again." A flicker of movement rippled across the surface, and the image of the girl became clearer, a child whose eyes brimmed with sorrow and an inexplicable wisdom. Her voice, soft and laden with heartbreak, filled the room. "We were left here with promises of salvation, but instead found only despair. Our cries echo in these halls, bound by the cruelty of those who cared not for our souls. In the darkness, a great void consumed us, and now your hearts must bear the burden of our secret." At that, the mirror's surface shattered into countless shards that fell around them with a sound like a million shattered dreams. The spectral vision of the girl flickered and slowly faded, as if being pulled away by an unseen force. In the shards, each of them caught fleeting glimpses of the past, games played in the flickering light of a makeshift lantern, tearful goodbyes whispered in the dead of night, and the malignant eyes of shadowy figures looming over small beds. Marcus, his voice strained as he tried to steady his hands, murmured, "She wasn't alone, was she? There were others, trapped in this place." Claire nodded, tears mingling with the dust on her cheeks as she recalled the pain in the diary's words. "The children, all of them. Their suffering fed the darkness here. We must find a way to break the cycle." As the night deepened, the building seemed to come alive in a chorus of lamenting echoes and soft weeping. The trio pressed on, venturing from the dormitory into a series of interconnected rooms that had once been a place of refuge but now served as mausoleums to lost lives. In one of these rooms, they discovered a small chapel, its sanctuary desecrated by time and sorrow. Faded stained glass windows projected colored shards onto broken pews, and in the center of the chapel lay a lone altar, its surface etched with cryptic symbols and childlike drawings depicting angels and devils locked in eternal struggle. There on the altar rested a delicate porcelain music box, its intricate design marred by cracks, its painted scene depicting a smiling cherub that was slowly being consumed by creeping vines. Claire gently opened the lid and the box began to play a haunting melody that mingled seamlessly with the melancholic lullaby heard earlier. The notes stirred something deep within her, a well of grief and longing that was nearly overwhelming. "This was their lullaby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The song meant to calm and cradle them in dreams, turned into a dirge of despair when hope was lost. Before they could fully absorb the sorrow, a sudden, violent gust of wind slammed the chapel door shut, plunging the room into darkness for an instant. In that moment, a chorus of whispered voices swirled around them, too many to count. A spectral congregation of lost souls calling out in unison. Liam's hand went to his chest as he steadied himself. "They're restless," he said, his tone both mournful and resolute. "We must help them find peace by uncovering the truth behind their fate." Determined to piece together the tragic events that led to the orphanage's downfall, the group continued through the labyrinth of halls and abandoned rooms, gathering fragments of evidence. A teacher's memoir here, a half-burned letter of apology there, that revealed a sinister pattern of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. It became clear that powerful figures had once colluded to silence the voices of these helpless children, their crimes obscured by bureaucratic indifference and the passage of time. What had begun as an attempt to save souls had turned into a ritualistic sacrifice of innocence, inviting something terrible to feed upon their misery. At the heart of the building, hidden behind a false wall in what was once the caretaker's quarters, they found a secret room. Inside, amid scattered personal effects and dusty ledgers, lay a confession penned by a former warden. In anguished handwriting, he recounted how a forbidden ritual had been performed. A misguided attempt to harness the children's sorrow to grant longevity to those in power. Instead, it had opened a dark portal, and the orphanage itself had become a prison for both the living and the dead. His final words echoed like a warning. "Know this, our cruelty has fed a hunger that will never be sated. Only through truth and penance can our dark covenant be undone." That revelation resonated with the trio. Overwhelmed yet resolute, they realized that in order to free the souls of those wronged, and perhaps to cleanse the lingering stain of evil, the truth needed to be born into the light, no matter the personal cost. It was not enough to document the horror, they must also act. As the first pale hints of dawn began to break through the heavy gloom, Claire, Marcus, and Liam gathered in the deserted courtyard of the orphanage. Standing before the imposing building, they made a silent pact to share the entire tale of what they had uncovered, to honor the voices of those forgotten, and to warn the world of the darkness that festers when cruelty is left unchecked. Claire recorded every detail in her battered notebook. Marcus's camera continued to capture the raw remnants of despair etched into every stone. And Liam, with his years of hardened experience, vowed that justice, though long delayed, would finally be served. In the growing light of day, as the oppressive mist began to lift and the orphanage's ghostly whispers faded into quiet resignation, an almost imperceptible shift seemed to ripple through the ancient walls. For one brief, transcendent moment, the sorrowful eyes of the painted cherub in the music box sparkled as if relieved. The chain of suffering felt, if only for an instant, broken by the brave act of remembrance and the promise of truth. With heavy hearts, yet a fierce determination to see justice done for those who had suffered in silence, the trio departed the site of the Hargrove orphanage. Their story would spread far beyond the remote valley, an enduring warning of the cost of cruelty and the power of redemption. But in the quiet hours of many nights to come, when the wind howled through Maine's forests and the moon cast long shadows on deserted roads, those who listened closely might still hear the faint, sorrowful lullaby of Hargrove, a reminder that some horrors are never truly laid to rest and that the echoes of lost souls forever linger where injustice once reigned.
Story number 7.
In the remote outskirts of a windswept moor, where the land itself seemed to weep with sorrow and the trees whispered secrets to the passing wind, lay the crumbling remains of Ashwood Farm. The once thriving homestead had long been abandoned, its battered wooden walls and sagging roof a testament to decades of neglect and untold tragedies. The locals, a superstitious folk who clung to fading traditions, spoke in hushed tones of the place. A realm of nightmares where the boundary between the living and the dead blurred with each passing year. Yet, drawn by a relentless need to uncover truth behind whispered legends, 3 strangers came together on a cold, rain-lashed night to confront the curse that had haunted Ashwood Farm for generations. Ava Carter, a tenacious documentary filmmaker with a soul scarred by personal loss, had long believed that true terror lay not in fantastical apparitions but in the truth buried beneath everyday tragedies. After discovering a series of cryptic, hand-drawn maps in her late grandfather's journal, all leading to Ashwood Farm, she felt an irresistible compulsion to follow the clues. Joining her was Elliot Reyes, a rugged ex-firefighter whose life had been upended by an inexplicable disaster, a blaze that devoured not only a building but his own sense of security. Elliot's scars were physical and invisible, and he now sought redemption by standing in the very heart of danger. Lastly, there was Miriam Lang, a reserved antiquarian and researcher whose deep understanding of forgotten lore was matched only by her own repressed traumas. Miriam believed that the farm concealed not just a history of human suffering, but a malignant force that preyed upon vulnerable souls. Under a slate-gray sky that threatened a torrent of rain, the trio converged at the rusted iron gate of Ashwood Farm. As they pushed the gate open, its shrill creak echoed into the desolation of the moor, as if the land itself was warning them away. Overgrown ivy choked the wood, and the once proud farmhouse stood as a fractured relic, half shrouded by mist. Ava's hand trembled slightly on the camera as she recorded the somber introduction to their investigation. "This farm," she explained softly, "has been abandoned for over 50 years, a silent witness to pain and secrets. Tonight, we hope to capture the truth behind the legends." Elliot's eyes, dark and haunted by memories of his past, scanned the broken silhouette of the farmhouse. "There's something wrong here," he muttered, almost to himself. "I can feel the weight of every lost moment and every unspoken regret." Miriam, ever the scholar, added quietly, "Legends speak of a curse. The ghosts of wronged souls may still linger, reliving their anguish. But perhaps it is more than mere specters. I fear it is the very spirit of despair itself." Their footsteps crunched on the gravelly path as they entered through a shattered doorway into a foyer choked with dust and decay. The air was heavy with the scent of damp rot and a metallic tang of long-dried blood. Faded family portraits on cracked walls depicted solemn eyes that seemed to follow their every move. In the stagnant darkness, their flashlights revealed remnants of once-cherished mementos: a cracked porcelain doll, a faded scarf, and a diary with a leather binding that splintered at the edges. Ava carefully opened the diary, its brittle pages filled with a childlike scrawl that belied the terror within. The diary belonged to a young girl named Lillian Ashwood, who had lived on the farm when it was a place of joy and hope before tragedy struck. Her entries detailed a gradual descent into fear as unexplained sounds crept through the night, as if invisible hands were touching her, urging her to hide. One entry, stained with what might have been tears or spilled ink, read, "Sometimes I hear the voices of those who have died. They tell me their secrets and beg for help. I am scared, but I know that one day someone will save us all." No sooner had Ava finished reading than a long, sorrowful moan drifted through the corridor, nearly drowning out the drumming of rain against the broken windows. Elliot gripped his jacket tighter. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice low and wary. Miriam nodded, her eyes dark with a mix of curiosity and dread. "It is as if the farm itself is speaking," she whispered. Guided by the diary's grim revelations, the trio proceeded deeper into the house, navigating narrow hallways that twisted like the labyrinthine memories of a fractured mind. In a small parlor long since stripped of color and life, they discovered a grand piano, its keys warped and silent. Strangely, amidst the decay, a single note echoed, a soft, haunting sound that resonated as if played by unseen hands. Ava's camera captured every moment, the image flickering between shadows and faint specters that might have been reflections of the past. "This is our moment," she said, exuding a blend of excitement and terror. "This is where the past bleeds into the present." As if in response, the lights of their flashlights began to flicker. Elliot, with a protective instinct born of countless rescues, attempted to shine his beam down a narrow staircase leading to a basement. "We need to go down there," he insisted. "The source of these voices might be hidden in the depths." With a nod from the others, they descended into the darkness of the lower level, a realm that smelled of wet earth and decay, where the walls pulsed with the damp echoes of time. In the basement, amidst rows of old storage crates and tattered relics, they found a room that had been sealed off. The door, reinforced with rusty bolts and bearing cryptic symbols scrawled across its surface, exuded a malevolent presence. Miriam's scholarly mind raced through old texts and forgotten lore. This door, it is not ordinary. It may be the boundary between our world and something else, an extension of the farm's tragedy. With measured caution, Elliot pried the door open, and it groaned in protest, releasing a surge of icy air that extinguished their flashlight beams momentarily. When the lights flickered back to life, the room before them was transformed. Where there had once been clutter, now lay a perfectly preserved parlor, bathed in a spectral silver glow. The furnishings were arranged as though expecting guests. A tea set on a table, a rocking chair gently swaying though no one sat there, and a tall mirror that reflected not their images, but a dimly lit corridor lined with shadowed figures. Ava gasped softly. "It's a different reality," she murmured. "A place frozen in time." Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and a low, almost imperceptible voice murmured from beyond, "Help us. Free us." The sound was layered with sorrow and desperation, each syllable laden with the agony of countless souls. Elliot clenched his jaw. "We are not alone here," he said, his voice a mix of grim determination and fear. "The souls of the Ashwood victims are trapped and they want to be released." Miriam's eyes shone with a quiet resolve as she stepped closer to the mirror. "There must be a ritual or a token, something tied to the original curse," she reasoned. "I recall from my studies that curses born of human agony often have a physical tether." Ava recalled the diary whose last entry suggested that the children had hidden their secrets in a safe place, hoping one day to be saved. "Maybe there is something they left behind, a charm or an amulet that binds these spirits to their suffering," she suggested. Their investigation led them out of the spectral parlor and into a narrow study filled with ancient maps and personal artifacts of the Ashwood family. In a secret compartment behind a bookshelf, Elliot uncovered a small wooden box. It was intricately carved with the family crest and wrapped in a faded blue ribbon. Inside lay a delicate silver locket, cold to the touch, containing a miniature portrait of Lillian and her long-lost twin brother. The inscription on the back read, "Forever in our hearts, until the light sets us free." As soon as Ava held the locket, the atmosphere thickened with a dreadful energy. The echoing cries of unseen voices intensified, and the floor trembled as if the very house was reacting to the relic. "I think this is our tether," whispered Miriam. "This locket is the key to breaking the curse." Elliot, his resolve hardening, said, "We must return it to where it belongs, perhaps in the family crypt or an altar once dedicated to the departed, so that the souls may finally find rest." Armed with the locket, the trio retraced their steps back to the main living quarters. The sense of urgency grew as the farm itself seemed to react. A prolonged creak of floorboards, murmurs carried by the wind through broken windows, and occasional glimpses of pale faces in the gloom. They navigated narrow passages until they reached a heavy oak door at the end of a long hallway. Miriam's eyes widened as she recognized the embossed crest of the Ashwood family on it. "This must be it," she breathed. The family crypt. With trembling hands, Elliot pushed the door open. Beyond lay a small stone chamber, lit by a faint ethereal light that seeped from the cracks in its weathered walls. The room was lined with granite plaques bearing the names of the departed. At its center, atop a marble pedestal, was a simple altar adorned with wilted flowers and a scattering of faded photographs, a makeshift memorial left by generations of grieving relatives. Ava stepped forward, clutching the silver locket as if it were her only hope. "I think this is where we set them free," she said. In a voice that wavered between determination and sorrow, she placed the locket on the altar. At that very moment, the silence of the crypt was shattered by a crescendo of anguished wails and soft, grateful whispers. The locket glowed with an inner radiance, pulsing like a heartbeat, and the images on its surface shimmered as if alive. In the corner of the room, the mirror from the spectral parlor appeared as a subtle reflection on the polished stone floor, a portal through which the souls might finally cross over. The air vibrated with the force of released despair as the spectral figures from the mirror gathered around the altar. A child's laughter, at once sorrowful and sweet, echoed softly. One by one, apparitions of the lost Ashwood children drifted toward the light. Their hollow eyes, once filled with terror, now shone with relief as if recognizing the long-awaited act of salvation. Elliot's face was stern yet touched with rare tenderness. "They are being freed," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "At last, the weight of our suffering can be lifted." But as the release began, the house trembled violently, and a malevolent counterforce stirred from the shadows. From a darkened corner of the crypt came a presence, a hulking, twisted figure, its form a contorted blend of flesh and shadow, eyes burning with unholy fury. It roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of Ashwood Farm. "You dare undo our bargain? You have awakened my wrath," the creature bellowed, its voice echoing like thunder. Ava stepped forward defiantly, her voice trembling yet resolute. "We do this for the souls who have suffered. You feed on their misery, on our terror, but no more." The creature lunged toward the altar, its jagged claws reaching for the fragile locket. Elliot intercepted with a cry, shielding the relic. Miriam, recalling an incantation from an old grimoire tucked away in her notes, began to recite in a steady, clear voice. "By the light of memory and the grace of the lost, I bid you depart, no matter the cost. Release the souls bound by sorrow's call. Let their torment end once and for all." As her words filled the chamber, the locket's glow intensified, sending out waves of radiant energy that bathed the crypt in a pale, healing light. The angry figure staggered as if struck by a physical force, its form dissipating into tendrils of shadow that shrieked in fury. The spectral voices rose in a harmonious chant, a dirge transformed into a hymn of deliverance. With a final ear-splitting wail, the dark figure was drawn into the light and vanished, leaving nothing but a lingering echo of its malevolent presence. For a long, waited moment, silence reigned in the crypt. Then, one by one, the faces of the Ashwood children smiled in gratitude before fading away into shimmering motes of light that drifted upward, carried away by a gentle breeze. The oppressive atmosphere lifted as the relic's glow dimmed softly, leaving behind a serene peace that filled the ancient room. Ava, Elliot, and Miriam stood together, hearts pounding, each overwhelmed by a cascade of emotions. Sorrow, relief, and an understanding that the darkness that had plagued Ashwood Farm was finally banished. Elliot's usually stoic face broke into a rare smile of hope as he said, "We've done it, their voices have been heard, and our own nightmares can finally rest." Ava's eyes glistened with tears of both heartache and catharsis. Their truth was buried in pain, but now it's freed. We must remember, always, the sacrifice and the suffering that led to this redemption. Miriam closed her notebook and nodded solemnly. This place will never be forgotten, not as a monument of horror alone, but as a lesson that even in the darkness, the light of remembrance can prevail. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the moor, washing Ashwood Farm in a gentle golden glow that belied the horrors of the night. The wind carried away the echoes of lost souls and the last remnants of malevolent sorrow, leaving behind a quiet hope that even the deepest curses can be undone by truth and compassion. In the days that followed, Ava's documentary, Elliot's photographs, and Miriam's meticulous notes became an enduring chronicle of Ashwood Farm, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit against unimaginable terror, and a somber reminder that our past, no matter how dark, can be reconciled only when we face it with courage and empathy.
Story number 8.
On the edge of a forgotten highway where the asphalt gave way to muddy tracks and gnarled trees stood like sentinels in the dusk, there lay the remnants of an old traveling circus known as the Marlowe Menagerie. Once a dazzling showcase of wonder and inexplicable marvels, the circus had been abandoned for decades after a night of unspeakable tragedy. Locals in the nearby town of Grayson's Hollow spoke in wary tones about the silent circus, claiming that on moonless nights, the echoes of laughter and distant music could be heard drifting from the empty grounds, as if the past refused to die. Evelyn Hart, a determined archivist with a restless curiosity about the obscure and macabre, had spent years combing through dusty records and faded photographs, piecing together the lore of the menagerie. Drawn to the place by an enigmatic letter signed only with the initials M.M., she convinced herself that uncovering its secrets might at last explain the inexplicable tragedies that had befallen it. Evelyn was joined by Blake Donovan, an ex-carny whose childhood had been inseparably entwined with the circus. Now in his mid-30s and burdened with guilt and haunting memories, Blake had returned to face the nightmares of his past. Completing the trio was Dr. Adrian Rowe, a pragmatic psychologist intrigued by the intersection of folklore and mental affliction. Adrian had seen how grief and suppressed terror could shape minds, and he suspected that the circus held a key to understanding collective trauma. As the trio drove down the cracked gravel road that led to the site, twilight bled across the sky in bruises of purple and red. The old marquee of the Marlowe Menagerie, though warped by time and neglect, still bore the faded name in bulbous, flickering letters. The air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and decaying leaves. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she whispered, "They say this place was once filled with magic, and then, one fateful night, with madness." Blake's jaw tightened in silent acknowledgement, his eyes scanning the dark silhouette of the big top, while Adrian adjusted his glasses and noted every detail with clinical precision. Their first steps within the grounds were tentative. The ticket booth, its glass long shattered, still sat in eerie isolation. Graffiti and old posters, tattered, yellowed, and smeared with layers of grime, vividly advertised acts of daring acrobats, mystical fortune tellers, and exotic beasts. Evelyn reached out and brushed her fingertips along the rusted metal as if trying to conjure a memory from the past. "There's an energy here," she murmured. "It's like the spirits of the menagerie are waiting to speak." The voices of the past did not come as gentle whispers at first. As the trio stepped onto the creaking wooden platform of the main arena, a discordant melody of a calliope suddenly erupted from somewhere deep in the ruin, its notes distorted and mournful. Blake shivered visibly. "I remember that sound," he said, his voice hoarse with regret. "It used to herald the arrival of the big show. But that night changed everything." Adrian frowned thoughtfully. "Our minds sometimes project our suppressed memories onto old legends," he cautioned, though even he could not deny the unsettling authenticity of the sound. They moved cautiously toward the center ring, where a circular stage lay cloaked in dust and cobwebs. At the ring's edge, a lone, cracked mirror reflected flickering images of their hesitant faces. Evelyn knelt down to inspect the mirror's surface, noticing faint scratches that resembled hurried inscriptions. In a shaky, almost inaudible script, one mark read, "Forever trapped between laughter and sorrow." Her heart pounded as she read the words aloud, and in that instant a chill wind swept across the arena, scattering loose papers and stirring memories that seemed to seep from the very walls. As darkness deepened, the trio discovered an old dressing room tucked behind a tattered curtain in one of the side tents. Inside, decayed costumes and chipped makeup boxes lay in disarray. Blake's hands trembled as he uncovered a dusty journal, a relic of the clown known only as Jester Jimmy, whose performances once drew rapt applause from enraptured audiences. In the journal, the clown had written of strange rehearsals, bizarre rituals behind the scenes, and a desperate desire to please the audience by making them forget their own sorrows. But later entries turned erratic and grim. The laughter echoes in my head. I see dark figures in the mirrors. Tonight the fire came, a cleansing flame that let loose our secrets. I fear we invited something in that we cannot contain. At that moment, a low, guttural laugh echoed in the dressing room, a laugh that was not entirely human but carried both mirth and malice. Blake's eyes widened in shock and horror, and he instinctively clutched Evelyn's hand. "It wasn't just a show, was it?" he whispered, voice breaking. That night, something changed inside us. I can still see the faces, twisted with terror. Adrian, though visibly unsettled by the experience, kept his composure. "Trauma alters memory," he said quietly. "But what you're describing suggests an external force at play, a presence that lingers here." Fueled by equal parts determination and dread, the trio pressed forward. They reconvened in the central arena beneath a sagging tent, now only a skeletal framework against the starless night sky. Evelyn set up her digital recorder, determined to capture any sounds or voices that might provide a clue to the circus's dark past. "I believe the answers lie in these voices," she asserted, her eyes glinting with a mix of fear and hope. As the wind howled outside, the recorder picked up a series of fragmented voices, a jumble of sorrowful whispers, desperate pleas, and a recurring message. "Remember us. Remember the joy. Remember the pain." The voices layered over one another, creating a cacophony that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. Blake's voice trembled as he said, "I remember the laughter and the screams. We were meant to entertain, but we were bound by something far more sinister." Adrian examined the recorder's playback, his analytical mind racing. "It appears to be a composite of sounds, echoes from that tragic night, perhaps even recordings of our own latent memories, mixed with something else entirely." He paused, tapping his pen anxiously against a notepad. What if the circus itself is a sort of nexus for these energies? A place where sorrow, fear, and joy fused into a living memory that replays on an endless loop? Evelyn looked around the arena, her gaze catching a glimpse of movement in the peripheral shadows. "I think we're not alone," she whispered. "Something is out there, waiting for us to uncover its story." At that moment, a spectral figure appeared at the far side of the ring, a dilapidated figure wearing a tattered ringmaster's coat and a top hat that had seen better days. Its eyes glowed with a cold, unearthly light, and its presence drew a palpable chill that stifled the stale night air. The figure spoke in a voice that was both commanding and mournful. "You trespass on sacred ground, seekers of truth. The Marlowe Menagerie was once the stage for delight and wonder, but it became a prison for those whose dreams turned to nightmares." Evelyn steadied herself, her recorder still rolling. "Who are you?" she asked, voice firm despite the tremor. The ringmaster's ghost regarded her with a sorrowful expression that hinted at a tragic past. "I am Elias Marlowe, the founder and ringmaster. I offered joy and marvel to the world, yet my ambition and the cruelty of fate tethered the souls of my performers to this place. I beg you, release us from this eternal performance." Blake's eyes filled with unshed tears as he recalled vivid flashes of his own time on the circuit, a bright stage filled with laughter that abruptly dissolved into chaos and relentless pain. How do we release you?" he stammered, voice thick with emotion. Elias's spectral gaze swept over the trio. "The key lies within the heart of the spectacle," he intoned. "Deep in the bowels of the tent, where the echoes of a final catastrophic act still resonate, lies a relic, an ancient medallion engraved with our names. That medallion binds us to our fate. Destroy it and our souls may be freed." The three exchanged uncertain looks. The medallion, if it existed, would be hidden in the lower corridors beneath the crumbling big top. With resolve forged by fear and compassion, the trio ascended a creaking staircase leading to an underground passage that smelled of mold and ancient regret. As they descended, the temperature dropped drastically and the walls seemed to whisper in voices almost too faint to distinguish. Every step echoed like the march of countless lost performers. In the subterranean chamber, illuminated by the flicker of a lone battery-operated lantern, they encountered a long-forgotten storage room filled with relics of past parades, old costumes, brittle posters, and dusty props. Near the center of the room, resting on a pedestal draped in a moth-eaten velvet cloth, lay a tarnished silver medallion. The medallion was intricately engraved with names, including that of Elias Marlowe and a slew of others whose identities were lost to time. The artifact pulsed with a dull light, as though imbued with the heartbeat of countless souls. Evelyn's hand hovered over the medallion as she said, "This is it, the heart of the curse." Blake stepped forward, placing his hand over hers in a gesture of solidarity born of shared pain. "We must end this torment. We owe it to every soul trapped here, every performer whose laughter turned to agony." Adrian nodded, though his scientific mind struggled to reconcile the spectral phenomena with logic. "We need to break the cycle. Perhaps by destroying this medallion, we can free the spirits and finally let this place rest." In the oppressive silence of that forgotten chamber, the three gathered their courage. With a deep, steadying breath, Evelyn lifted the medallion from its pedestal. Its cold metal sent shivers through her body, as though the weight of untold sorrow pressed against her very soul. "For all of you," she whispered, voice choked with emotion. In that fleeting moment, as if commanded by the fate of the dead, Blake reached into his pocket and retrieved a heavy antique hammer, a relic from his own past in the carnival. With a solemn nod from Adrian, who silently recorded every second in his notepad, Blake swung the hammer. The blow resonated like a death knell. The medallion shattered in an explosion of cold sparks, and a piercing, spectral cry filled the chamber. In that moment, a deafening roar, equal parts agony and liberation, reverberated through the underground passage. The walls trembled, and the very air seemed to shimmer with the scattering of years of pent-up grief and terror. Back above ground, the spectral ringmaster Elias Marlowe stood near the center ring. His eyes, once glowing with a malevolent hue, began to soften with relief and regret. "The tether is broken," he murmured, his voice carrying on the chill wind that swept across the decaying arena. Slowly, one by one, the ghostly images of the former performers appeared on the periphery of the ring, fragile apparitions that flickered with sorrowful smiles. Their figures, previously bound by the cursed medallion, now seemed to release the heavy chains of their torment. The ethereal voices that had once pleaded for salvation rose in a gentle chorus. "Thank you. We are free." In that transformative moment, the oppressive atmosphere that had long shrouded the Marlowe Menagerie began to dissipate. The cold dread that had haunted its halls for decades softened into an almost tangible relief. Evelyn, Blake, and Adrian stood silently in the center of the arena, each acutely aware of the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. Tears glistened in Blake's eyes as he finally allowed himself to accept that the nightmares of his past were, at least in part, over. "They're finally at rest," he whispered, voice trembling between sorrow and relief. Elias Marlowe, his form now flickering like an old film reel nearing its end, spoke in a tone that was both lamenting and grateful. "You have given us our final curtain call, our exit from the stage of endless suffering. May you carry our story as a reminder that even in the darkest of performances, redemption can be found in the courage to confront our deepest terrors." As the first pale hues of dawn crept over the horizon, the trio ascended the decrepit staircase from the underground chamber. Outside, the once forlorn grounds of the Marlowe menagerie lay bathed in a strange, melancholic light. The dilapidated marquee, though still battered by time, no longer seemed to harbor the malignant echo of its cursed past. Instead, it stood as a silent sentinel, its faded letters a testament to the tragedy and eventual liberation of souls that had once danced there. Evelyn set up her camera one final time, capturing the serene yet haunting stillness of the arena. "This is our story," she said softly, her voice laced with both sorrow and hope. "We have witnessed the echoes of a forgotten past and learned that even the most sinister curses may be undone by confronting our inner demons and the demons of history." Blake placed a respectful hand on her shoulder while Adrian scribbled feverishly in his notebook, determined that every detail would be preserved for posterity. In the distance, as the sun ascended beyond the horizon and the mist slowly evaporated from the moor, a final, gentle whisper floated on the breeze, an echo of gratitude from freed souls, now traveling into the realm of rest. The silent circus, once a theater of nightmares, had at last found its final act of release, leaving behind only memories, a lesson in resilience, and a promise that the light of truth can conquer even the most abhorrent darkness.
Story number 9.
In the blistering heat of a Louisiana summer, where the humid air clung like a second skin and cypress knees emerged from murky, stagnant waters, a long-forgotten plantation stood isolated along a twisting bayou. Blackwater Plantation had once been a beacon of southern prosperity, but decades of neglect and an unspeakable history had warped it into something else entirely. Whispers told of restless souls roaming its overgrown grounds, of eerie lights flickering behind shattered windows, unspeakable events that echoed across the still waters at night. Despite these warnings, a trio of determined souls sought to unearth its buried secret, each driven by a personal need to confront the horrors of the past. Lorraine Baptiste, a cultural historian with deep ancestral ties to the region, arrived at the plantation with a heavy heart and equally heavy research tomes. Having grown up hearing fragmented stories of a curse that befell Blackwater, she intended to reconcile her family's dark legacy with the documented truth. Next came Dr. Eric Langston, a forensic psychologist fascinated by the interplay between historical trauma and modern manifestations of fear. Eric's career had been dedicated to studying how unresolved grief could warp collective memory into tangible terror, and Blackwater was a case that beckoned him like a siren call. Completing the trio was Celeste Moore, a local journalist whose life had been punctuated by personal loss and encounters with inexplicable phenomena. Celeste, worn by skepticism yet fueled by desperate hope for healing, believed that reporting the truth would bring solace to generations long silenced. They met at dusk under a blood-orange sky, the setting sun casting long, grotesque shadows over Blackwater's crumbling facade. The building, once a stately mansion with proud columns and sprawling verandas, now wore a cloak of decay, peeling paint, shattered glass, and vines that crept hungrily up its walls. As they stepped through the rusted iron gates, a stagnant, sour aroma of rot and something indefinably ancient welcomed them. Lorraine hesitated before speaking in a measured, low tone. This place was built on stories of both opulence and unspeakable sorrow. Every stone seems to remember the anguish of the past. Eric nodded, his eyes scanning the towering cypress trees that encircled the grounds like silent witnesses, while Celeste loaded her vintage camera, determined to capture the spectral beauty and terror in every frame. The group entered the mansion through a side door, one that creaked open as if protesting the disturbance. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with stagnant dust and the echo of distant, forgotten cries. Their flashlights illuminated a long corridor lined with portraits of grim-faced ancestors, whose hollow eyes appeared to follow them with silent accusation. Lorraine's fingers brushed over a faded family crest emblazoned on a wall panel, a crest that bore the initials B for Baptiste, a stark reminder of the legacy that had both shaped and haunted her life. In the grand parlor, the trio discovered evidence of a time when music and laughter had filled the space. A grand piano, its surface marred with deep scratches and layered dust, sat beneath a cracked crystal chandelier. Celeste's voice broke the heavy silence. I wonder what tragedies turned this place from a home of celebration to a mausoleum of memories. As if in response, a soft, plaintive melody, the lull of a half-forgotten tune, seeped through the musty air. Eric's eyes flickered with both professional interest and a personal shudder. That sound, he said, feels too deliberate, almost like a beckoning. It might be the residue of memories or the manifestation of something else. Drawn by a sense of morbid curiosity, the trio pressed deeper into the mansion. Their exploration led them to a narrow staircase that descended into the bowels of Blackwater, the basement where light was an unwelcome stranger. The stairs spiraled downward, each step punctuated by the groan of old wood and the echo of their own anxious breaths. In the basement, amid crates of forgotten relics and decayed furniture, they stumbled upon a small chapel-like room. Its walls bore meticulous carvings of anguished figures and cryptic symbols. The space exuded an aura of ritualistic significance. At its center lay an altar, draped with moth-eaten cloth and arrayed with various relics, a tarnished mirror, old letters bound with ribbon, and a delicate silver locket. Lorraine carefully picked up the locket, her eyes filling with tears as she recognized the initials MB inscribed on its back, her great-grandmother's initials, whispered about in family lore as a woman of extraordinary sorrow. This locket, she murmured, was said to belong to Marie Baptiste, the matriarch who bore the curse of Blackwater. They say she tried to bind the restless spirits to her pain, and in doing so doomed her bloodline to endless torment. The locket, cold and weighty in her hand, seemed to pulse with the energy of a long-forgotten heartbeat. Before they could process this revelation, the oppressive silence shattered with a deafening thud from behind them. The trio spun around as a door slammed shut upstairs. Celeste's face paled, and Eric's eyes narrowed as he said, "Someone, or something, is in here with us." With pounding hearts, they emerged from the chapel and headed back toward the main corridor, their flashlights dancing across walls that now appeared to bleed shadows. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, the air was thick with the pungent smell of decaying rosewater. A wardrobe stood ajar, its interior dark and cavernous. Celeste's curiosity overcame her trepidation, and she cautiously approached. As she reached out to touch the worn wood, the wardrobe door swung open abruptly, and a child's giggle, a sound so eerie and disembodied that it chilled her to the core, echoed through the room. I heard that sound before," she stammered, her voice barely audible, as if it belonged to a spirit clinging to its youth. Eric knelt beside her, scanning the dark corners while Lorraine clutched the locket, her knuckles white with dread. The sequence of strange occurrences continued as the night deepened. In the dusty dining hall, with its long-abandoned table set for a feast that had grown moldy, they discovered a collection of diaries and letters bound in brittle paper. The pages detailed the slow unraveling of Marie Baptiste's psyche as she attempted to harness forbidden rituals in a desperate bid to keep her family together. One entry, written in trembling script, read, "I have made a pact with the shadows. In my sorrow, I offered my soul to bind the restless dead to my will, that they might comfort our pain. But the darkness hungers beyond measure, and now I fear that my own heart has become a gateway for their unending torment." The room seemed to tremble as if absorbing her words, and a sudden gust of wind whipped through the broken windows, scattering leaves and torn pages across the cold floor. "This isn't just a tale of loss," Eric whispered. "It's a confession, a ritual gone horribly wrong that has trapped these souls here, and perhaps even corrupted the living blood of the Baptiste legacy." Lorraine's eyes glistened with a mix of determination and despair. "We must free them," she declared, "and in doing so, release my family from this curse." As midnight approached, the trio reconvened in the parlor. Celeste's camera had captured fleeting images of hazy figures and indistinct faces drifting through the darkness, a spectral audience to the tragic play unfolding within Blackwater. Eric, pacing restlessly, began to piece together a plan. The locket and the diaries seemed to be the nexus of this curse. If we can perform a reversal ritual, one that acknowledges the pain of those lost and offers forgiveness, we might break the malignant tie. His voice trembled with both hope and hesitance. I have read that the spirits thrive on unacknowledged grief. Only by truly naming our loss can we begin to heal. Reluctantly, they agreed to perform the ritual within the grand foyer, which still retained whispers of former splendor. The windows were open to the humid night, letting in the mournful murmur of the bayou. With trembling hands, Lorraine opened the locket and retrieved a folded scrap of paper, a final note Marie had written but never sent, pleading for release from the curse she herself had enacted. As Celeste's camera recorded every moment, Eric read aloud the incantation he had painstakingly pieced together from the diaries. By the sorrow of our blood and the tears of the past, let the chains of regret be shattered at last. Hear the cries of the forgotten, let their pain be seen. In forgiveness and truth, may the cursed be redeemed. At the moment of the incantation, the mansion shuddered violently, as though the very foundations groaned under the weight of centuries. A spectral wind swept through the grand foyer, stirring the tattered drapes and sending a cascade of voices, a cacophony of grief, anger, and desperate hope rippling through the air. In a blinding flash of pale light, the faded portraits along the walls seemed to come alive, their eyes glistening with tears and regret. Shadows resolved into recognizable shapes, the delicate figure of a little girl clinging to a worn doll, the anguished visage of Marie Baptiste herself, and countless others whose silent sufferings had long been consigned to oblivion. For a heartbeat, time itself stilled, and the three witnesses felt the full force of the legacy poured forth. Lorraine's heart ached as she saw her ancestors pleading for mercy, their eyes imploring her to forgive the sins that had tainted their name. Celeste's camera captured images that defied explanation. Ethereal faces emerging from the gloom, their features contorted in pain and relief, as if the night was finally acknowledging the tragedies it had borne witness to. Eric's voice, resolute and commanding, filled the space. We honor your sorrow. We accept your pain. Let your memories be unshackled, for only in the light of remembrance can the curse be undone. As the incantation reached its crescendo, a deafening silence swallowed the room. Then, in an almost imperceptible shift, the oppressive heaviness began to lift. The spectral figures, one by one, dissipated like mist caught in the morning sun. The locket's cold metal warmed in Lorraine's hand, and the ancient diary's brittle pages fluttered gently, as though the ghosts themselves were sighing in relief. Outside, the wind began to still, and the murky waters of the bayou calmed as if the land had finally exhaled a long-held breath. For several interminable minutes, none of them spoke. In that quiet aftermath, a subtle transformation took place within Blackwater Plantation. The once crumbling walls no longer whispered with malicious intent. Instead, they carried an air of melancholic resignation, a quiet farewell to the old sorrows that had bound them for so long. The voices were gone, but their echoes of grief and the promise of absolution lingered like fragile memories etched in time. Eric broke the silence softly. It is done. Or perhaps it is only the beginning of healing. Lorraine gently closed the locket and tucked it away, a relic of a painful past that would now serve as a reminder of both suffering and the strength it took to seek redemption. Celeste, eyes brimming with tears and awe, whispered, I will tell your story, our story, so that these voices will never be lost to time again. They departed Blackwater Plantation as the first light of dawn stained the horizon with soft pink and gold hues. The lingering images of spectral faces and sorrowful eyes would haunt their dreams for many nights to come. But in that quiet, transformative moment, there was also a fragile hope that the cycle of grief could be broken, that the darkness might finally yield to an everlasting truth. The legacy of Blackwater, though rooted in despair, had been confronted with courage, and in its confrontation, a promise of redemption was born. As the trio drove away along the winding bayou road, the plantation receded into the distance, a memory of haunting horror and now gentle absolution. The whisper of the past mingled with the rustling of cypress fronds, a reminder that while the dead may walk among us in our dreams, it is only by facing their suffering that we can let the light of forgiveness guide us forward.
Story number 10.
In the dense heart of a forgotten forest where moonlight scarcely penetrated the ancient canopy, there stood an isolated structure known simply as the Weeping Pines. Rumored to be cursed by events shrouded in blood and anguish, the mansion, now little more than crumbling stone and splintered wood, had become a bastion for those who sought a taste of the supernatural. Its name, whispered in wary tones by the few locals who remembered its history, derived from the gnarled pines encircling it. These twisted trees, their branches draped with moss and sorrow, seemed to weep an unceasing lament for the misdeeds of a long-forgotten era. Marina Calloway, a talented but troubled author whose latest manuscript had stalled at the brink of inspiration, arrived at the forest's edge on a chilly autumn evening. Dissatisfied with the conventional tales of urban terror, Marina was drawn to the Weeping Pines by a combination of personal obsession and an inexplicable tug at her soul. She believed the mansion held the key to understanding not only a haunted past, but the darker recesses of human desire, a promise of truth so harrowing it both repelled and fascinated her. Accompanying her was Oliver Graves, a former private investigator whose career had been marred by unresolved cases and whispered suggestions of phenomena beyond mortal explanation. Oliver's rugged features, etched with the scars of disappointment and loss, betrayed a man who had seen too much but spoken too little of what lurked in the spaces between reality and nightmare. And lastly, there was Celia Anders, an art historian specializing in occult symbolism, whose quiet demeanor belied a fervent curiosity in the macabre. Celia had uncovered references to a secret society that met at the Weeping Pines, and whose rituals were said to have ignited a chain of unspeakable events. Her meticulous research had led her here, convinced that the mansion's every cobwebbed corner held clues to forbidden knowledge. The trio met at the rickety iron gate of the property as dusk settled, painting the sky in deep shades of bruise purple and indigo. The wind carried a cold, mournful tune that rustled the dead leaves on the ground. Marina, clutching a battered leather journal, stepped forward. "I've read every account of the curse that clings to this place," she said in a low, determined whisper. "Tonight, we follow those whispers and bring their truth to light." Oliver's gaze, dark and calculating, swept over the looming silhouette of the mansion. "Just remember," he warned quietly, "some secrets are meant to remain hidden." Celia adjusted the strap of her antique camera, her eyes alight with both apprehension and anticipation. The symbols carved into the wood, the unspoken language of these lines, if we're lucky, we might decipher what truly brought this place to ruin. They pushed open the gate, its creak echoing like a lament through the silent forest. A narrow, overgrown driveway led them to the mansion's entrance, a towering oak door studded with iron that looked as though it had been bolted shut for centuries. Inside, the air was heavy with stagnation, and the odor of decay mingled with the faint trace of something bitterly sweet, like old grief. Dim light slithered in through fractured stained glass windows, casting shattered rainbows of color on walls draped in peeling wallpaper and shadow. The first chamber they encountered was the foyer, once a grand reception hall, but now a gallery of forlorn memories. Tattered portraits lined the walls, ancestors with eyes that seemed to harbor untold sorrow and rage. Marina paused, her fingertips brushing over a portrait framed in ornate gold leaf. "This family, their eyes seem to watch us," she murmured, feeling a chill course through her. Oliver replied, "They might be guarding secrets they were forced to keep." Celia, scanning the strange arcane glyphs hidden behind the ornate frames, added, "Symbols of protection, or perhaps of binding." A sudden gust of wind rattled the loose boards beneath their feet as they advanced into the parlor. Here, the remnants of a lavish past lay scattered like discarded relics, a grand piano with keys chipped and silent, a cracked mirror that warped the reflection of the room into twisted, nightmarish images. In the mirror, Celia swore she saw fleeting impressions, a woman in a tattered gown with eyes glistening like wet stones, reaching out as if pleading for redemption. "I must have imagined it," she insisted, though her voice wavered. Their exploration eventually led them to a narrow staircase spiraling downward into what appeared to be a basement. The air grew colder as they descended, each step accompanied by the mournful groan of ancient wood. In the flickering light of their lanterns, the basement revealed a labyrinth of dusty corridors and abandoned rooms. Along one wall, Oliver discovered old ledgers and parchments stained with dark script. He gently unfolded a brittle piece of paper and read aloud, "In the year of sorrow, when blood mingled with lament, we bound our fates to shadows unyielding. Let our sacrifice be a penance, our souls forever tethered to the darkness that knows no end." Marina's eyes widened as the words sank into the silence. This must refer to the secret society Celia mentioned. A ritual, a bargain made in despair. Celia's hands trembled as she knelt beside a faded symbol etched into the stone floor, its design a macabre convergence of serpents and weeping eyes. "The sigil here," she whispered, "is one of binding. It was meant to hold something back, or perhaps to seal fate upon those who invoked it." Their investigation was abruptly interrupted by an otherworldly sound, a soft, indistinct humming that resonated through the corridor like the lament of a lost soul. Oliver motioned for silence, and the trio pressed forward with heightened caution. In a small antechamber, dimly illuminated by what they assumed was moonlight filtering through a narrow window, they discovered an altar covered in a faded, blood-stained cloth. Upon it lay a collection of objects: a rusted silver chalice, a weathered statue of a winged figure with downcast eyes, and a small, intricately carved box adorned with occult symbols. Marina, drawing closer to the box, opened it gingerly. Inside, nestled among withered petals and fragments of paper, was a delicate key and a tattered scrap of parchment. The parchment, penned in spidery handwriting, read, "Only in the embrace of darkness can truth be unveiled. Use the key, unchain the silence, and bear witness to the agony we wrought." Before they could discuss the implications, the lights seemed to waver and the temperature plummeted. A spectral figure appeared at the far end of the chamber, a young man, his face pale and eyes hollow, dressed in garments that hinted at an era long past. He spoke in a voice that trembled with sorrow. "You have come to unbind our fate. I am Lucien, and I was once one of those who partook in the ritual. We bargained with the darkness for power, but it devoured our souls. I have been left here in limbo, a keeper of our regret. Please, help us find release." Marina's heart pounded as she stepped forward. "Lucien, tell us what must be done," she implored softly, her voice nearly choked by emotion. Lucien's eyes, rimmed with eternal sorrow, met hers. "There is a mirror," he said, gesturing weakly toward a heavy door at the opposite end of the chamber. "A mirror that binds our memories to this place. In it, the faces of the fallen are imprisoned. Only by shattering it can our spirits be freed, though the cost will be your own truth laid bare." Oliver's skepticism warred with his instinct to help, while Celia, her scholarly passion igniting anew, asked, "And what does this cost, Lucien?" His reply was barely a whisper. "To look within the mirror is to confront your darkest self, to face guilt, grief, and all that is hidden in shadow. There is no turning back from that vision." They exchanged glances, each understanding that to break the curse of the weeping pines, they must first unmask the horrors locked within their own souls. With reluctant determination, they followed Lucien's silent beckoning toward the door. Pushing it open, they entered a vast, circular chamber, dominated by a colossal mirror that spanned nearly the entire wall. The mirror's surface was not reflective of the room as it was now. Rather, it pulsed with a dim, ghostly light, as though it were a portal to a tortured past. Marina took a deep breath and clutched the key from the carved box. "This may be the answer," she said, though her voice quivered. "The key might unlock whatever binds these souls." With trembling fingers, she inserted the key into an inconspicuous lock along the frame of the mirror. At her touch, the mirror shuddered, and the spectral light swelled, bathing the chamber in a palette of mournful blues and grays. Suddenly, the mirror came alive with images, visions of a grand celebration turning into chaos, of candlelit rituals that spiraled into bloodshed, of faces contorted in agony and despair. The air filled with the sound of overlapping voices, a cacophony of laughter and screams, prayers and curses. Oliver staggered as a vision assaulted him, the betrayal of a friend, a tragic fall from grace, and the endless regret that had haunted him for years. Celia's eyes widened as she saw herself, isolated in the corridors of a forgotten museum, burdened by the weight of unspoken secrets about her own ancestry. Marina, forced to confront the darkness behind her creative mind, saw the faces of lost loved ones whose voices she had silenced with her ambition. In the midst of this psychic maelstrom, Lucien's spectral figure appeared in the mirror, his voice echoing through the chamber. Now release our sorrow with yours, embrace the cost of truth. His eyes pleaded, and in that moment, each of them understood that the only way to shatter this prison was to let go of their own hidden torment. With resolve born of desperation, they began the ritual as instructed by Lucian's whisper. Oliver, voice hoarse yet steady, recited words of apology to the phantoms of his past, asking forgiveness for the mistakes he had long carried. Celia, tears streaming down her face, acknowledged every secret, every sin of her own bloodline, and begged for mercy for herself and her ancestors. Marina, in a voice that wavered between sorrow and determination, confessed her own deepest regrets and the burden of stories left untold, of lives she had failed to honor with the truth. The energy in the chamber grew palpable. The mirror's surface pulsed faster and then began to crack. With a final resonant chime that echoed like a dying bell, the mirror shattered into 1,000 brilliant fragments that rained down like shards of memory. In that shattering moment, the oppressive weight that had suffused the weeping pines lifted, replaced by a silence so profound it roared in their ears. As the glass pieces settled, Lucian's form flickered, now at peace, a soft, sad smile crossing his translucent face before he vanished into the ether. The shattered mirror left behind no images, but rather the quiet murmur of freed souls drifting upward like autumn leaves in a gentle wind. In the aftermath, the chamber filled with a bittersweet light. Oliver slumped against the cold stone wall, the ghostly images receding from his mind, replaced by a fragile hope that he might finally cast aside the burdens of his past. Celia gently collected a handful of mirror shards, their surfaces no longer reflecting torment, but only their own faces, vulnerable yet resolute. And Marina, tears of relief mingling with the rain that now began to fall softly outside, closed her journal. She whispered, "We have set them free, and perhaps, in doing so, ourselves as well." In the long hours before dawn, the trio remained in the ruined chamber, each silently processing the revelations that had shattered the darkness both in the mansion and in their own hearts. When they finally emerged from the weeping pines, the forest had transformed. The oppressive mist had given way to a fragile twilight, and even the ancient pines seemed to stand a little taller, their branches no longer weeping, but swaying gently in the night breeze. Later, as they recounted their harrowing ordeal to one another on a long drive away from the accursed estate, the silence between them was filled with unspoken understanding. They had faced horrors beyond mortal fear, and had borne witness to the truth that sometimes the most terrifying demons are those we harbor within. Their lives would never be the same. They now carried scars of revelation, and the tender hope that even in darkness, light can be found when one dares to confess the truth. In the years that followed, Marina's next book soared beyond bestseller lists, a tale of redemption and terror steeped in personal honesty. Oliver quietly found solace in helping others confront their own pasts, while Celia's exhibitions on occult symbolism spoke not only of mystical rituals, but of the transformative power of forgiveness. And deep in the forest, the weeping pines stood as a silent sentinel to a night when suffering was met with courage and the shattered mirror of horror was reassembled into a mosaic of healing.